Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before like the video, subscribe to the channel also. Where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The mansion loomed before me, a behemoth of stone and shadow against the fading twilight. As I fumbled with the keys, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. I told myself it was just nerves. After all, it's not every day you get asked to house sit a sprawling estate that looks like it jumped straight out of a gothic novel. I pushed open the heavy oak door, wincing at the loud creak that echoed through the cavernous entryway. "Hello," I called out, my voice small in the vastness. Silence answered me, broken only by the ticking of an antique grandfather clock. "Get it together, Sarah," I chided myself. "You're alone here, just like Mrs. Blackwood said you'd be. No need to jump at shadows." I lugged my suitcase up the grand staircase, my footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. The bedroom Mrs. Blackwood had directed me to was larger than my entire apartment, with a four-poster bed that could easily sleep four. I unpacked quickly, eager to explore the rest of the house before it got too dark. Room after room revealed itself to me, each more opulent than the last. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a music room with a grand piano gathering dust, a sunroom filled with exotic plants I couldn't name. It was like stepping into another world, one of old money and faded glamour. As night fell, I retreated to the kitchen to make dinner. The modern appliances stood out starkly against the vintage decor, a jarring reminder of the present day. I ate my pasta in silence, the scrape of my fork against the plate uncomfortably loud. That first night I slept fitfully. The house creaked and groaned around me, settling in ways my city apartment never did. Every noise had me sitting bolt upright, heart racing. Before I remembered where I was, by the time dawn broke, I felt more exhausted than when I'd gone to bed. The next day passed uneventfully. I worked remotely from the library, the Wi-Fi surprisingly good for such an old house. As evening approached, I decided to run myself a bath in the clawfoot tub, hoping it would help me relax. I was just sinking into the steaming water when I heard a thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. My blood ran cold. I held my breath, straining to listen. There it was again, the slow, deliberate tread of someone trying to move quietly. "It's just the house settling," I told myself, "or your imagination running wild." But deep down I knew better. With shaking hands, I got out of the tub and dressed quickly. I crept to the bathroom door and pressed my ear against it. The footsteps had stopped, but now I could hear something else, the sound of drawers opening and closing. Someone was in the house, searching for something. Panic clawed at my throat. My phone was in the bedroom, the landline was downstairs. I was trapped. Think, oh Sarah, think. I looked around the bathroom, desperate for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on a heavy crystal soap dish. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Taking a deep breath, I eased the bathroom door open. The hallway was empty, but I could hear movement coming from one of the spare bedrooms. As quietly as I could, I crept towards the stairs. I had just reached the top of the staircase when a floorboard creaked beneath my foot. The noise from the bedroom stopped abruptly. Heart pounding, I flew down the stairs, taking them two at a time. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me, giving chase. I ran for the front door, only to find it locked. In my panic, I couldn't remember which key was which. A hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. I lashed out blindly with the soap dish, feeling it connect with something solid. There was a grunt of pain and the grip on my shoulder loosened. I didn't wait to see who my attacker was. I ran for the kitchen, thinking of the back door behind me. I could hear the intruder recovering, their footsteps pounding after me. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the microwave clock. I stumbled through it, hands outstretched, searching for the door. My hips slammed into the kitchen island, and I bit back across of pain. Where was the damn door? My fingers brushed against cool glass. The door. I fumbled for the handle, my sweaty hands slipping on the smooth metal. God, I yanked the door open and burst out into the cool night air. The vast manicured lawn stretched out before me, the trees at its edge a dark, forbidding wall. I ran towards them, the damp grass soaking through my socks. I had just reached the tree line when I heard the back door clam open. "Stop," a deep voice bellowed. The sound spurred me on, pushing me deeper into the woods. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, roots threatening to tripped me with every step. I had no idea where I was going, no plan beyond get away, get help. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but fear kept me going, the certainty that if I stopped, something terrible would happen. Finally, when I felt I couldn't take another step, I saw lights through the trees, a house. I stumbled towards it, relief making me dizzy. As I broke through the tree line, I realized with a start that I recognized this house. It was the mansion. Somehow, in my blind panic, I had run in a circle. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure what to do. Then I saw a car in the driveway that hadn't been there before. A police car. Safety. I ran towards it, waving my arms. Help, I screamed. Oh, please help me. The front door of the mansion opened, and a police officer stepped out, followed by Mrs. Blackwood. Oh, thank God, Mrs. Blackwood said, rushing towards me. Sarah, dear, are you all right? We've been so worried. I stared at her, uncomprehended. Rending, there's someone in the house. I managed to gasp out. An intruder. He chased me. Mrs. Blackwood and the officer exchanged a look. Sarah, Mrs. Blackwood said gently, there's no intruder, it's just Harold. Harold, as if summoned by his name, a man appeared in the doorway. He was tall and lean with graying hair and a kindly face. There was a bruise forming on his cheek. I'm so sorry for frightening you, he said, his voice deep and apologetic, the same voice that had shouted after me in the woods. I should have announced myself. Sarah, this is my husband, Harold. Mrs. Blackwood explained he wasn't supposed to be back until next week, but his business trip ended early. He came home to surprise me, not realizing I had asked you to house sit. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going suddenly evaporated, leaving me weighted. But the noises, the searching. Harold looked sheepish. I was looking for my reading glasses. I didn't want to wake you, so I was trying to be quiet. When I heard you run, I tried to explain, but he gestured to his bruised cheek. You have quite an arm. I felt my face burn with embarrassment. I'm so sorry, I stammered. I didn't know. No, it's my fault entirely. Harold insisted I should have called ahead, or at least turned on some lights. Mrs. Blackwood put an arm around my shoulders. Come inside, dear, you're shaking like a leaf. Let's get you warmed up, and we'll sort this all out. As we walked back to the house, the police officer following behind, I couldn't help but laugh. All that terror, all that running, and it had been a simple misunderstanding. But later that night, as I lay in bed listening to the Blackwoods move about the house, a small part of me wondered, what if it hadn't been Harold? What if it had been a real intruder? I pulled the covers up higher, suddenly aware of just how big and empty the mansion was, and how many places there were for someone or something to hide. Sleep was a long time coming. That night, the first rays of sunlight had just begun to pierce through the dense canopy when I realized I was hopelessly lost. What was supposed to be a rejuvenating solo hike through the Cascade Mountains had turned into a nightmare, and I was about to stumble into something far worse than I could have imagined. I've always prided myself on my outdoorsman skills. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I spent more time in the woods than I did in my own backyard. But as I stood there, my worn hiking boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crisp mountain air. The trail I'd been following for the past 2 days had gradually become less defined until it disappeared altogether. I pushed on, confident in my ability to navigate by the sun and my trusty compass, but now surrounded by towering pines and jagged rocks, everything looked the same. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the panic rising in my chest. Stay calm, Jake, I muttered to myself. Panic is the enemy. I decided to climb to higher ground, hoping to spot a landmark or maybe even catch a glimpse of the highway in the distance. The climb was steep and my muscles protested with every step. I was rationing my water, unsure of when I'd find a stream to refill my bottles. As I neared the top of the ridge, I heard something that made me freeze mid-step. Voices, human voices. Relief washed over me. Other hikers. Maybe they could help me get my bearings. I quickened my pace and ignoring the burning in my thighs. But as I got closer, the voices became clearer and my relief turned to unease. These weren't the cheerful tones of fellow hikers enjoying nature. The voices were low, angry, and punctuated by the occasional sound of metal clanging against metal. I slowed down, moving as quietly as I could. Years of hunting with my dad had taught me how to move through the forest without making a sound. I crouched behind a large boulder, peering around it cautiously. What I saw made my blood run cold. In a small clearing about 50 yards away, I could see 3 men. They were rough-looking with unkempt beards and dirty clothes, but it wasn't their appearance that sent a jolt of fear through me. It was what they were doing. The men were gathered around what looked like a makeshift lab. Plastic contained containers, tubing, and propane tanks were scattered around. One of the men was carefully measuring out a white powder while another stirred a bubbling pot over a portable stove. I didn't need to be a chemist to know what I was looking at. This was a meth lab hidden deep in the wilderness where no one was likely to stumble upon it except I held my breath, not daring to move a muscle. These men were dangerous, that much was clear. If they caught me, I doubted they'd simply let me go on my way. "Damn it, Tony," one of the men suddenly shouted, making me flinch. "I told you to watch the temperature. You're going to ruin the whole batch." "Screw you, Mike," the man stirring the pot shot back. "I know what I'm doing. Both of you shut up," the third man growled. He seemed to be the leader. "We don't need any noise carrying. Last thing we need is some ranger stumbling on us." If only they knew how close they were to the truth. I knew I needed to get out of there, and fast, but which way? I was lost to begin with, and now I had to factor in avoiding these criminals. One wrong move, one S&A twig, and I could be discovered. Slowly, carefully, I began to back away from my hiding spot. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure they must be able to hear it crack. The sound of a branch breaking under my foot was like a gunshot in the quiet forest. I froze, my whole body tensing. "What was that?" one of the men said sharply. "Probably just a deer," another replied. But he didn't sound convinced. "Check it out," the leader commanded. "Could be a bear." Attracted by the smell, I heard footsteps coming in my direction. Panic overtook me, and I ran. I no longer cared about being quiet. All that mattered was putting as much distance between myself and those men as possible. Behind me, I heard shouts of alarm. They had spotted me. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through underbrush, leaping over fallen logs. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging cuts. But I didn't slow down. I could hear them pursuing me, their heavy footfalls and angry shouts spurring me on. I had no idea where I was going. My only thought was to keep moving, to not let them catch me. My lungs burned and my legs felt like they were on fire, but fear kept me going. Suddenly the ground disappeared from under my feet. I had run right off the edge of a steep incline. I tumbled down the slope, my world becoming a dizzying blur of earth and sky. I came to a stop at the bottom, the breath knocked out of me. For a moment I lay there dazed and gasping for air. Then I heard the voices again, closer now. Ignoring the pain radiating through my body, I forced myself to my feet and started running again. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees becoming a green blur. As I ran, I had no idea how long I'd been running or how far I'd gone. My throat was raw, my mouth dry as dust, but still I pushed on. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I burst out of the tree line and onto a road, an actual paved road. I could have cried with relief, but I wasn't safe yet. I could still hear shouts in the distance. They were still after me. I looked up and down the road, praying to see a car, aim, a truck, anything, but it was deserted. Left with no other choice, I started running down the road. It had to lead somewhere, right to civilization, to safety. I don't know how long I ran along that road. Time seemed to lose all meaning. My whole world narrowed down to the rhythmic pounding of my feet on the asphalt and the burning in my lungs. And then, like a mirage in the desert, I saw at a gas station. Never in my life had I been so happy to see one of those garish neon signs. I staggered into the parking lot, startling an old man filling up his pickup truck. "Please," I gasped out, my voice hoarse. "I need help. Call the police." The man took one look at me, wild-eyed, covered in cuts and bruises, gasping for breath, and hurried into the store. Moments later, he came back out with the clerk, who was already on the phone with 911. As I sank to the ground, my legs finally giving out, I heard the clerk describing my condition to the dispatcher. The old man draped his jacket over my shoulders, murmuring words of comfort. It wasn't until I heard the wail of approaching sirens that I finally allowed myself to relax. I was safe. I had made it. The aftermath was a blur of police statements and medical checks I told the authorities everything I had seen, and they assured me they would investigate. They found the lab abandoned, but with clear evidence of recent activity. The men, however, had vanished into the vast wilderness. It took me a long time to feel comfortable in the woods again. After that, the forest, once my sanctuary, had become a place of terror, but slowly I found my way back. I still hike, still seek out the solitude of nature, but now I'm always aware that even in the most remote places, you're never truly alone, and sometimes that's not a comforting thought at all. The flickering fluorescent lights cast an eerie glow over the empty corridors as I made my rounds. It was just another quiet night at Westfield Mall, or so I thought. Little did I know that in a matter of hours I'd be fighting for my life against an unseen enemy in a place I once considered mundane. My name's Mike, and I've been the night security guard at Westfield. For the past 3 years, it's usually a boring job. Walk around, check the locks, make sure no one's trying to camp out in the food court overnight. But that night was different. It started like any other shift. I arrived at 10 p.m. just as the last of the cleaning crew was leaving. I nodded to Janice, the elderly woman who always stayed late, to make sure the floors were spotless. All quiet tonight, Mike, she said with a smile. See you tomorrow. If only she knew. I settled into the security office, a small room filled with monitors showing feeds from the mall's numerous cameras. I did a quick scan. Nothing but empty doors and darkened corridors. Perfect. Around midnight, I started my first round of the night. The mall was eerily silent, my footsteps echoing off the tiled floors. I'd never tell anyone, but these walks always gave me the creeps. Something about the mannequins in the store windows, their blank faces seeming to follow me as I passed. I was on the second floor, passing by the large fountain in the center atrium, when I heard a faint noise. No, like metal scraping against metal. I froze, straining my ears. There it was again. Hello, I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the empty space. No response. I pulled out my flashlight, sweeping its beam across the darkened stores. Nothing seemed out of place. Must be the old pipes, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I continued my arc, but now I was on high alert. Every shadow seemed deeper, every noise amplified. By the time I made it back to the security office, my nerves were frayed. I sank into my chair, eyes scanning the monitors. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That's when I saw a shadow moving quickly across one of the screens. I leaned in, heart racing. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined it. I rewound the footage, watching carefully. There in the corner of the screen, a figure darted past, too fast to make out clearly. My mouth went dry. Someone was in the mall. I grabbed my radio, ready to call for backup, but hesitated. What if I was overreacting? I didn't want to be the guard who called the cops over a trick of the light. I decided to investigate myself first, armed with my flashlight and a heavy wrench I kept in the office for emergencies. I ventured out into the mall. The corridor seemed different now, menacing. Every storefront could be hiding an intruder, every shadow concealing a threat. I moved cautiously, ears straining for any sound out of place. As I rounded a corner near the electronics store, I heard it again, that scraping sound, louder this time. It was coming from inside the store. I approached, rode slowly, flashlight beam trembling slightly. The store's security gate was intact, but as I got closer I could see it wasn't fully closed. There was a gap at the bottom, just big enough for someone to squeeze under. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I should go back, call the police, but curiosity and a misplaced sense of duty pushed me forward. I ducked under the gate, wincing at the noise it made. The store was pitch black, the displays of TV and computers looming like silent sentinels. My flashlight beam seemed pathetically small in the darkness. Security, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Show yourself. Silence, then a crash from the back of the store. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, catching a glimpse of movement. Someone was definitely here. I moved deeper into the store, wrench gripped tightly in my sweaty hand. Another crash, closer. This time I spun around, but saw nothing. They were toying with me. I realized whoever they were enjoying this game of cat and mouse. Suddenly the lights in the store flickered on. I blinked, momentarily blinded. When my vision cleared, I saw them, 3 men, dressed all in black, wearing masks. that covered their faces. They were spread out blocking my exit. One of them held a crowbar, another a knife. Well, the one in the middle said, his voice muffled by the mask, "Looks like we've got company, boys." I raised my wrench, trying to look more confident than I felt. "You're trespassing," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "Leave now and I won't call the cops." They laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the store. "I don't think you understand the situation," ran a cop. The leader said, "We're not going anywhere, and neither are you." They started to advance, spreading out to surround me. I backed up, mind racing. I was outnumbered and outarmed. I needed a plan fast. My back hit a display stand, and an idea struck. I grabbed the laptop off the stand and hurled it at the nearest intruder. He ducked, and in that moment of distraction, I ran. I darted between the aisles, knocking over displays. As I went to slow them down, I could hear them cursing, giving chase. I reached the security gate and slid under it, not stopping to catch my breath. I ran through the mall, the sound of pursuit close behind. I needed to get to the security office, how to call for help, but they were between me and the office. I took a sharp turn, heading for the service corridors. If I could lose them in the maze of back hallways, I might have a chance. The service door slammed behind me as I entered the narrow corridor. It was darker here, the emergency lights casting long shadows. I ran, taking random turns, hoping to throw off my pursuers. Left, right, another right. I was quickly lost in the warren of corridors, but I could still hear them, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. I found myself in the mall's basement, surrounded by hulking machinery, generators, HVAC systems, water heaters. The noise was deafening, masking any sounds of pursuit. I crouched behind a large boiler, trying to catch my breath and think I needed to get to a phone to call for help, but my radio was back in the security office, and my cell phone was in my locker. I was on my own. A noise to my left made me freeze. One of them was close, searching methodically. I could see his flashlight beam sweeping across the floor. I held my breath as the beam passed inches from my feet. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he'd seen me, but the light moved on. I waited until I could no longer hear him, then started to move. I needed to get back upstairs to find a way out. I crept through the basement, every nerve on high alert. I'd almost made it to the stairs when a hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun, swinging my wrench blindly. It connected with something solid, and I heard a grunt of pain. I didn't wait to see who I'd hit. I ran, taking the stairs two at a time. I burst back into the main mall. I could hear shouts behind me. They were all after me now. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, legs pumping. I rounded a corner and saw at the exit freedom. I slammed into the door at full speed, already imagining the cool night air on my face, but the door didn't budge. It was locked. Of course it was locked. I had locked it myself at the start of my shift. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I fumbled for my keys behind me. I could hear them getting closer. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Turn. Damn, you turned just as I heard them around the corner. The lock clicked. I yanked the door open and burst out into the night. I ran across the parking lot, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached the 24-hour diner across the street. I burst in, startling the lone waitress. "Call the police," I gasped. "Please." The next few hours were a blur of police statements and questions. They searched the mall, but found no sign of the intruders, just some broken displays in the electronics store and a crowbar left behind. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't face going back into that mall, couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. Sometimes late at night I still wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of footsteps in my ears, and I wonder what if I hadn't made it to that door in time. The crackling of our campfire did little to mask the eerie silence that had fallen over the forest. What had started as a peaceful getaway for me and Sarah had turned into a nightmare as I stared into the darkness beyond our small circle of light. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Little did I know our idyllic camping trip was about to become a desperate fight for survival. My name's Alex, and I've always loved the great outdoors. When I suggested to my girlfriend Sarah that we take a weekend camping trip to celebrate our anniversary, she was all for it. We picked a spot deep in the Ozarks, far from the usual tourist trails. We wanted solitude, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. Careful what you wish for. I guess the first day was perfect. We hiked through lush forests, the canopy above us alive with birdsong. We set up our tent in a small clearing near a bubbling stream, the sound of the water a soothing backdrop to our quiet conversation. As night fell, we sat by our campfire roasting marshmallows and pointing out constellations in the clear sky above. It was on the second day that things started to feel off. We were exploring a nearby ridge when Sarah stopped suddenly. Did you hear that? She asked, her voice tight with tension. I listened, but heard nothing beyond the usual forest sounds. Hear what? I thought I heard voices, she said, her eyes scanning the trees around us like someone shouting. I strained my ears, but still heard nothing unusual. Probably just other hikers, I said, trying to sound reassuring, but a small knot of unease had formed in my stomach. We continued our hike, but the carefree mood of earlier had evaporated. I found myself jumping at every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush. Sarah kept close to me, her earlier enthusiasm replaced by nervous glances over her shoulder. As we made our way back to our campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every time I turned to look behind us, I saw nothing but trees and shadows, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each step. We reached our clearing just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, but even the beautiful sunset couldn't dispel the unease that had settled over us. Maybe we should pack up and head back, Sarah suggested as we prepared dinner. I've got a bad feeling about this place. I was tempted to agree, but my pride got in the way. Let's stick it out one more night, I said. It's probably just our imaginations running wild. We came out here for an adventure, right? Sarah nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. Neither was I, if I'm being honest. As darkness fell, we huddled close to our campfire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. We spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid of being overheard. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had us on edge. It was just after midnight when we heard it, a long low whistle followed by an answering call from the other side of our clearing. Sarah grabbed my armor, fingers digging into my skin. Alex, she whispered, her voice trembling, there's someone out there. Before I could respond, a figure stepped into the edge of our firelight, a man tall and lean with a scraggly beard and clothes that had seen better days. He was holding a hunting rifle. Well, he said, his voice rough. Looks like we've got company, boys. As if on cue, more men emerged from the darkness. I counted 5 in total, all armed, all looking at us with a mixture of curiosity and something darker, more predatory. I stood up slowly, pulling Sarah with me. We don't want any trouble, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We're just camping. We'll pack up and leave right now if you want. The first man, clearly the leader, laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Oh, you're not going anywhere, he said. See, we've got ourselves a little operation out here, and we can't have you two running off and telling anyone about it. My mind raced. What kind of operation could they be running out here in the middle of nowhere? Then it clicked. Drugs. We must have stumbled too close to their setup. We haven't seen anything, Sarah said, her voice high with fear. We don't even know where we're exactly. Please just let us go. The leader pretended to consider this for a moment, then shook his head. Can't take that risk, sweetheart. No, I'm afraid you'll be staying with us for a while. The other men started to move closer, forming a tight circle around us. I looked around desperately for a way out, but we were completely surrounded. That's when I saw it, a flash of metal in the fur light. One of the men had pulled out a length of rope. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I grabbed a burning log from the fire and hurled it at the nearest man. He yelled in pain and surprise as embers scattered across his chest. Run, I shouted at Sarah, pushing her towards the darkest part of the forest. We took off, crashing through the underbrush behind us. I could hear shouts of anger and the sound of pursuit. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. We ran blindly through the dark forest, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. I had no idea where we were going, only that we needed to put as much distance between us and those men as possible. Sarah stumbled, and I caught her before she could fall. Keep going, I gasped, pulling her along. We can't stop. The sound of our pursuers seemed to be getting closer. They knew these woods better than we did, and they were gaining on us just when I thought we couldn't run any further. We burst out of the tree line and found ourselves at the edge of a steep ravine. The stream we had camped near had carved a deep gully into the earth, the water now a rushing torrent far below us. What do we do? Sarah cried, her eyes wild with fear. I looked back at the forest, saw flashlight beams dancing between the trees. They were almost upon us. We have to jump, I said, gesturing to the other side of the ravine. It wasn't too wide, maybe 10 feet across. We could make it. We had to make it. Sarah looked at me like I was crazy, but the sound of voices growing nearer made up her mind. She nodded. On 3, I said, gripping her hand tightly. 1, 2, 3. We leaped together, the ground disappearing beneath our feet. For a heart-stopping moment we were suspended in the air, the roar of the water below us drowning out everything else. Then we hit the other side, rolling to break our fall. Pain shot through my ankle, but adrenaline kept me moving. I pulled Sarah to her feet, and we staggered into the cover of the trees on this side of the ravine. Behind us I heard shouts of frustration. They had reached the ravine, but it had bought us precious time. We kept moving, pushing our exhausted bodies to their limits. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and desperate flight. Every sound had us freezing in terror, certain we were about to be discovered. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we finally heard what we had been praying for, the distant sound of traffic. We had reached a road. Stumbling out of the forest, we flagged down the first car we saw, an old pickup truck driven by an elderly farmer. The look on his face when he saw us, dirty, bleeding, wild-eyed with fear, must have been something to behold. We babbled out our story as he drove us to the nearest police station. The authorities took our statement and sent out search parties, but they never found any trace of the men or their operation. Maybe they had cleared out, knowing we would bring the law down on them. It took a long time for the nightmares to stop, for us to feel safe again. Sarah and I are still together, stronger for having survived that night. But we don't go camping anymore. Some scars run too deep, some fears are too primal to ever fully shake off. Sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I can still hear those whistles echoing through the trees, still feel the terror of being hunted, and I wonder about those dark forests, about what other secrets they might be hiding, waiting to be stumbled upon by unsuspecting campers looking for a peaceful getaway. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the night. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony broken only by the occasional flicker of my truck's headlights catching a road sign or a startled animal's eyes. I never expected that picking up a stranger would turn my routine haul into a nightmare, but that's exactly what happened on that moonless night in the middle of nowhere. My name's Jack, and I've been a long-haul trucker for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff on the road, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. It was just past midnight, and I was hauling a load of electronics from Chicago to Phoenix. The radio was playing softly some late-night talk show about alien abductions. I chuckled to myself, thinking how some people would believe anything to make their lives more exciting. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road. Thumb out, hoping for a ride. Now, I'm not usually one for picking up hitchhikers. Too many horror stories, too many risks, but something about this guy made me slow down. Maybe it was the late hour, or the fact that we were miles from anywhere, or maybe I was just tired of my own company. I pulled over, the air brakes hissing as the truck came to a stop. The man jogged up to the passenger side, and I leaned over to open the door. "Where you headed?" I asked as he climbed in. "West," he said simply. "As far as you're going." I gave him a once-over as he settled into the seat. He was younger than me, probably in his early 30s, lean with close-cropped hair and intense eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He had a small duffel bag that he kept clutched tightly on his lap. "I'm Jack," I said, pulling back onto the highway. "Mike," he replied, not offering a hand to shake. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the rumble of the engine and the whisper of tires on asphalt. I tried to make conversation, ask him where he was from, what he did for a living, but Mike's answers were short, evasive. After a while I gave up and focused on the road. It was about an hour later that I first noticed something was off. Mike had been fidgeting in his seat constantly, checking the side mirrors. At first I thought maybe he was just nervous about hitching a ride with a stranger, but then I caught him glancing at me, a calculating look in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Fine," he said quickly, too quickly, just not used To being in a truck this big I nodded, but I didn't believe him. My instincts honed by years on the road were screaming that something wasn't right. We were passing through a particularly desolate stretch of highway when Mike suddenly spoke up. "Pull over," he said, his voice tight. When I said pull over now, I glanced at him and felt my blood run cold. Mike had a gun in his hand, pointed straight at me. My mind raced. Was this a robbery? Was he going to kill me and take the truck? I thought about my wife back home, about our kids. Would I ever see them again? "Look, man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "if you want money, I've got some cash in my wallet. Just take it and go. No need for this to get ugly." Mike laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "This isn't about money, Jack. This is about survival. Now pull over before I decide to redecorate your cab with your brains." I did as he said, guiding the massive truck onto the shoulder. As soon as we came to a stop, Mike was in motion. He reached across me and grabbed the keys from the ignition. "Get out," he ordered, gesturing with the gun. I climbed out of the cab, my legs feeling like jelly. Mike followed, keeping the gun trained on me. "What do you want?" I asked, hating how my voice shook. "I need your truck," Mike said, "and I need you to drive it. Drive it where you'll know when we get there. Now get back in your driving." As I climbed back into the driver's seat, my mind was working overtime. I needed to find a way out of this situation. Maybe if I could distract him, I could make a grab for the gun, or maybe I could intentionally drive badly, try to attract the attention of a highway patrol car. But as if reading my thoughts, Mike spoke up. "Don't try anything stupid, Jack. I've got nothing to lose." "Which means you've got everything to lose. Just drive normally and do what I say." So I drove hours past the landscape outside, changing as we headed west. All the while Mike kept the gun trained on me, his eyes constantly scanning the road behind us. "Who are you running from?" I finally asked, unable to contain my curiosity any longer. Mike was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. "Then bad people," he said softly. "People who want me dead." "Why?" He laughed again, that same humorless sound. "Because I know things they don't want anyone to know." My mind raced with possibilities. Was he some kind of whistleblower, a witness to a crime? Whatever it was, I was now involved, whether I wanted to be or not. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Mike suddenly tensed. He muttered, staring intently at the side mirror. I glanced in my rear view mirror and saw a black SUV gaining on us fast. "Drive faster," Mike ordered, his knuckles white around the gun. I pressed down on the accelerator, the engine roaring as we picked up speed, but the SUV was faster, sleeker. It pulled alongside us, and I saw the passenger window rolling down. "Get down," Mike yelled just as the sound of gunfire erupted. I ducked instinctively, feeling the truck swerve as bullets pinged off the metal. Mike was returning fire, leaning out the window to shoot at our pursuers. The next few minutes were chaos. I struggled to keep the truck on the road while trying to stay low. The sound of gunfire was deafening in the confined space of the cab. Suddenly there was a loud bang, and the truck lurched violently. They had shot out one of our tires. I fought with the steering wheel, trying to keep us from jackknifing there. Mike shouted, pointing ahead, "Pull into that rest stop." I saw the sign for the upcoming rest area and made for it, the truck swaying dangerously on its blown tire. We skipped into the parking lot, coming to a stop in a cloud of dust and burning rubber. "Run," Mike yelled, already jumping out of the cab. I didn't need to be told twice. I was out of the truck and running. Before I even had time to think, I could hear car doors slamming behind us, shouts of anger. Mike and I ran towards the small cluster of buildings that made up the rest stop. It was early, and the place was deserted. We burst into the main building, startling a sleepy-looking attendant. "Call the police," I gasped out. "Are there men with guns?" But before I could finish, the door burst open again. 3 men entered, all holding weapons. The attendant screamed and ducked behind the counter. Mike shoved me behind a rack of snacks and opened fire. The men returned fire, and suddenly the quiet rest stop was transformed into a war zone. Chips bags exploded, sending a rain of potato shards everywhere. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. I cowered behind the rack, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. This was insane. How had my normal night turned into this? The gunfight seemed to last forever, but it was probably only a few minutes. Then suddenly silence fell. I peered Around the edge of the rack, Mike was still standing, his gun still raised. The three men were on the ground, not moving. I felt bile rise in my throat and had to swallow hard to keep from throwing up. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. Someone, probably the attendant, had managed to call the police. Mike turned to me, his face grim. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Before I could respond, he was gone, running out the back door of the rest stop. I thought about following him, but my legs wouldn't move. I just sat there, surrounded by the debris of the gunfight, waiting for the police to arrive. The aftermath was a blur of police statements and questions. I told them everything about picking up Mike, about the chase and the shootout. They seemed skeptical at first, but the evidence backed up my story. It turned out Mike was indeed a whistleblower set to testify against a powerful crime syndicate. The men chasing us were hitmen sent to silence, and Mike was never found, having vanished into the desert. As for me, I was clear of any wrongdoing, but the experience changed me. I still drive my routes, still haul my loads across the country, but I'm more cautious now, more aware of the darkness that can lurk behind a friendly face, and I never ever pick up hitchhikers anymore. The first sign of trouble was the sputtering of my car's engine, a sound that sent a chill down my spine on that desolate stretch of highway. As the vehicle lurched to a stop, I had no idea that this breakdown would be the beginning of a nightmarish encounter that would test my will to survive. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones in our imagination, but the ones masquerading as good Samaritans. My name is Emily, and I've always prided myself on being independent and resourceful, but on that fateful night, those qualities would be pushed to their limits. I was on my way back from a job interview in the next state over. It was a long drive, but I was riding the high of what I felt was a successful meeting. The sun had set hours ago, and the highway had thinned out to just the occasional passing truck. I was tired, but determined to make it home. That's when my trusty old sedan decided it had had enough. The engine made a horrible grinding noise, and despite my pleading and cajoling, the car rolled to a stop on the shoulder of the road. "No, no, no," I muttered, turning the key in the ignition repeatedly. Nothing, not even a sputter. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. I was in the middle of nowhere, my cell phone showing no bars of service. The moonless night seemed to press in on all sides, the darkness beyond my headlights absolute. Taking a deep breath, I popped the hood and got out of the car. I didn't know much about engines, but I hoped it might be something simple, something I could fix. As soon as I lifted the hood, I knew it was hopeless. The engine was a maze of pipes and wires. That meant nothing to me. I was just about to close the hood when I saw headlights approaching in the distance. Relief washed over me. Maybe they would stop and help, or at least let me use their phone. The vehicle, an old pickup truck, slowed. As it neared me, it pulled over, and a man got out. In the glow of my headlights, I could see he was middle-aged, with a weathered face and calloused hands. He wore worn jeans and a flannel shirt, looking every bit the part of a local farmer or rancher. "Car trouble?" he called out, walking towards me. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep the nervousness out of my voice. "It just died on me. I don't suppose you know anything about engines," he chuckled. "I might know a thing or two. Mind if I take a look?" I stepped aside, allowing him to peer into the engine compartment. He poked around for a few minutes, making thoughtful noises. "Well, looks like your timing belt shot," he finally said. "Not something we can fix out here, I'm afraid." My heart sank. "I don't suppose you have a cell phone I could borrow? Mine's not getting any service out here." He shook his head. "Sorry, don't believe in those things, but tell you what, I can give you a ride to the nearest town. There's a mechanic there who could help you out." I hesitated. Every instinct was screaming at me not to get into a car with a stranger, especially out here in the middle of nowhere, but what choice did I have? I couldn't stay here all night, and who knew when another car might come along? "That would be great, thank you," I heard myself say. He smiled, but something about it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Happy to help. Name's Tom, by the way, Emily," I replied, grabbing my purse from my car. As we drove, Tom kept up a steady stream of small talk. He asked about where I was from, where I was headed. I answered vaguely, not wanting to give away too much information. Something about him was making me increasingly uneasy, though I couldn't put my finger on why. We had been driving for about 20 minutes when I realized something was wrong. We should have reached a town by now, or at least seen some signs of civilization, but there was nothing but darkness outside the windows. How much further is it to town?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Tom glanced at me, and this time there was no mistaking the coldness in his eyes. "Oh, we're not going to town, Emily." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, where? Are we going?" He didn't answer, just pressed down harder on the accelerator. The truck picked up speed, eating up the empty road ahead. Panic surged through me. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Child Lux," I realized with horror. "Please," I said, my voice shaking, "just let me out. I won't tell anyone, I swear." Tom laughed, a harsh sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, I know you won't tell anyone. No one ever does." The implication of his words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't the first time he had done this. How many other stranded motorists had he picked up promising help only to— I couldn't even finish the thought. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. I could try to grab the wheel, force us off the road, but at this speed that would likely kill us both. I could try to reason with him, appeal to his humanity, but the cold gleam in his eyes told me that was a lost cause. As we sped through the night, Tom started talking again, but this time his words chilled me to the bone. "You know, Emily, you really shouldn't trust strangers," he said, his tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "Bad things happen to girls who aren't careful, but don't worry, it'll all be over soon." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I forced them back. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Suddenly an idea struck me. It was risky, potentially fatal, but it was the only chance I started coughing violently, pulling over in my seat. "What the hell?" Tom said, glancing over at me. I continued coughing, making choking noises. "Can't breathe," I gasped out. Tom looked uncertain. "For the first time." "Hey, cut that out," he said, but I could hear a note of concern in his voice. I slumped in my seat, my coughs turning to wheezes. I closed my eyes, letting my body go limp. Tom muttered. The truck began to slow down. I felt the vehicle pull over to the side of the road. Tom put it in park and leaned over me. "Hey, wake up," he said, shaking my shoulder roughly. This was my chance. My eyes snapped open, and I drove my elbow into his face with all the strength I could muster. I felt his nose crunch under the impact, and he reeled back with a howl of pain. In his moment of distraction, I lunged for the keys in the ignition. I yanked them out and scrambled for the door, my fingers scrabbling at the lock. Tom recovered quickly, grabbing for me, his fingers tangled in my hair, yanking me back. I screamed, more enraged than fear, and twisted in his grip. My free hand found his eyes, and I dug my fingers in without mercy. He let go with a scream of agony, and I tumbled out of the truck onto the hard ground. Pain shot through my body, but adrenaline kept me moving. I staggered to my feet and ran. I could hear Tom behind me cursing and stumbling in the darkness, but I had the advantage now. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and I was younger, faster. I ran like I had never run before, my lungs burning, my legs pumping. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. The keys were still clutched in my hand, cutting into my palm. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Eventually, I couldn't hear Tom anymore, but I didn't slow down. The night was alive with noises, the rustle of wind through grass, the hoot of an owl, the scurrying of small animals. But to my terrified mind, every sound was Tom coming to finish what he had started. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw lights in the distance, a town, or at least a gas station. Civilization, safety. With a final burst of energy I didn't know I possessed, I sprinted towards the lights. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a small gas station, a lone beacon in the darkness. I burst into the fluorescent lit store, startling the sleepy-looking clerk behind the counter. "Please," I gasped out, "call the police. There's a man." He tried to. I couldn't finish the sentence. The adrenaline that had kept me going suddenly drained away, leaving me shaky and weak. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor. The events of the night finally catching up with me. The clerk, to his credit, didn't hesitate. He grabbed the phone and dialed 911 while keeping away eye on the door. The police arrived quickly, their flashing lights a welcome sight. I told them everything, describing Tom and his truck in as much detail as I could remember. They found him a few hours later trying to fix his truck on the side of the road. The keys I had taken were the only copy he had in his truck. They found evidence linking him to several unsolved disappearances in the area. As for me, I was lucky. Apart from some cuts and bruises, I was physically unharmed. The mental scars took longer to heal. For months after, I couldn't drive at night without breaking into a cold sweat. Every passing truck on the highway made my heart race. But I survived. I outsmarted a predator and lived to tell the tale, and if my story can serve as a warning to others to trust their instincts and be cautious, then maybe some good can come from that terrifying night. I still drive that stretch of highway sometimes, and every time I pass the spot where my car broke down, I say a silent thank you to whatever force was looking out for me that night, and to the strength I found within myself when I needed it most. The crumbling facade of the abandoned Millbrook factory loomed before us, its broken windows staring down like hollow eyes. We were just a group of friends looking for a thrill, urban explorers seeking the perfect spot for some cool photos. Little did we know we were about to stumble into a nightmare that would test best our will to survive and change us forever. My name's Jake, and I've always been fascinated by abandoned places. There's something haunting yet beautiful about a building left to decay, nature slowly reclaiming what man has discarded. So when my friends and I heard about the old Millbrook factory on the outskirts of town, we knew we had to check it out. There were 5 of us that day: me, my best friend Tom, his girlfriend Sarah, and our friends Mike and Lizzie. We'd done this kind of thing before, but never in a place quite this big or isolated. As we approached the factory, I felt a familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. The chain link fence surrounding the property was rusted and been easy enough to slip through. We made our way across the overgrown parking lot, our footsteps crunching on broken glass and gravel. This place is creepy as hell, Lizzie whispered, her camera already out and snapping pictures. That's the point, isn't it? Mike grinned, but I could see he was a bit on edge too. We found a side door that was hanging off its hinges and slipped inside. The interior was dark and musty, years of dust and decay filling our nostrils. Beams of sunlight stream through holes in the roof, illuminating dancing motes of dust. Let's split up, Tom suggested. We'll cover more ground that way. I wasn't too keen on the idea, but everyone else seemed excited about it. We agreed to meet back at the entrance in an hour and set off in different directions. I made my way deeper into the factory, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The place was a maze of rusted machinery and collapsed shelving. Every step echoed ominously, and more than once I spooked myself with my own reflection in a grimy window. I was in what looked like an old office area when I heard a shuffle of movement too heavy to be a rat or other small animal. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding. Guys, I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast space. No answer. I turned slowly, sweeping my flashlight around the room. Nothing seemed out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving quickly past the doorway at the end of the hall. It was too big to be any of my friends. Fear gripped me, but curiosity won out. I moved towards the doorway, every nerve on high alert. As I reached the threshold, I heard voices, low, rough whispers that definitely didn't belong to any of my friends. I peered around the corner, and my blood ran cold. In what must have been the factory's main floor, I saw 3 men. They were gathered around a collection of crates, passing packages between them. Even from a distance, I knew what I was seeing. This was a drug deal. I must have made a noise, a gasp, or a shifting of my feet, because suddenly one of the men looked up. Our eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Then all hell broke loose. Hey, the man shouted, reaching for something at his waist. I didn't wait to see what it was. I turned and ran. I could hear shouts and footsteps behind me as I tore through the factory. My mind was racing. I needed to find my friends to warn them we needed to get out of here now. I rounded a corner and slammed right into Tom. We both went down in a tangle of limbs. Jake, what the hell, man? Tom groaned, rubbing his head. No time, I gasped, scrambling to my feet. We need to go now. Where are the others? The urgency in my voice must have gotten through to him, because he didn't ask any more questions. Sarah's just down there, he pointed. I don't know where Mike and Lizzie went. We found Sarah quickly, and I gave them a rushed explanation. As we moved, their eyes widened in fear as they realized the danger we were in. We need to find Mike and Lizzie, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I nodded, but before we could decide on a plan, we heard a scream. It was Lizzie. We ran towards the sound, caution forgotten in our desperation to reach our friend. We burst into a large room and saw Lizzie backed into a corner, one of the men advancing on her. Mike was on the ground, not moving. Without thinking, I grabbed a piece of rusted pipe from the ground and charged. I caught the man by surprise, swinging the pipe and connecting with his shoulder. He went down with a yell of pain. "Run," I shouted at Lizzie. She didn't need to be told twice. Tom was checking on Mikey's breathing. He reported, "I think he's just knocked out." The man I'd hit was getting to his feet, murder in his eyes. Behind him I could see his two companions entering the room. "You kids picked the wrong place to play explorer." One of them growled. "We were trapped. The only exit was behind the men, and they were blocking our path." My mind raced, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. That's when I saw a conv belt leading up to a higher level. If we could get up there, maybe we could find another way out the belt. I hissed to Tom, "We need to get up there." He nodded, understanding immediately. "On three," he whispered. "1, 2, 3. We moved as one. Tom and I grabbed Mike under the arms and ran for the conveyor belt. Sarah and Lizzie were right behind us. The men, caught off guard by our sudden movement, took a second to react, but that second was all we needed. We scrambled up the rusted conveyor belt, the sharp edges cutting into our hands. I could hear the men shouting, their footsteps pounding as they gave chase. We reached the upper level and found ourselves in a maze of catwalks and suspended walkways. The factory stretched out below us, a labyrinth of shadows and rusted metal. "Which way, Sarah?" panted. I looked around frantically. There, I pointed to a door on the far side of the room. It was marked with a faded exit sign. We ran across the catwalks, the whole structure shaking under our feet. Behind us I could hear the men climbing up after us. We reached the door and I yanked it open, revealing a rusted fire escape. Without hesitation we started down. We were about halfway down when I heard a gunshot. The sound echoed through the factory, making us all flinch. "Keep moving," I shouted. We practically fell down the last few flights, our feet clanging on the metal steps. As soon as we hit the ground we ran. We didn't stop running until we reached Tom's car, parked a few blocks away. We piled in, Mike still groggy but conscious now, and Tom, peeled out of there like the devil himself, was chasing us. It wasn't until we were miles away, the factory long out of sight, that we finally allowed ourselves to breathe. What just happened?" Lizzie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I told them everything I had seen about the drug deal and the chase. As I spoke, the reality of what we'd just been through began to sink in. We debated about whether to go to the police, but fear won out. What if those men had connections? What if they came after us or our families in the end? And we made a pact to never speak of what happened to anyone that day. Changed us all. We'd gone looking for a thrill and found terror instead. The nightmares lasted for weeks, months. For some of us, every unexpected noise made us jump. Every stranger on the street a potential threat, but it also brought us closer together. We'd face death and come out the other side. That kind of experience bonds you in ways nothing else can. We never went urban exploring again after that. The thrill wasn't worth the risk. But sometimes when I pass an abandoned building, I can't help but wonder what secrets it might be hiding, and I shudder remembering the day our curiosity almost got us killed. The Millbrook factory still stands, as far as I know, a decaying monument to a dying industry and a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in forgotten places. If you ever find yourself tempted to explore such a place, remember our story. Sometimes the real monsters aren't the ghosts of the past, but the very real dangers of the present. The flickering fluorescent light above me buzzed like an angry insect, casting an eerie glow over the empty corridors. It was just another quiet night at Oak Ridge office complex, or so I thought. Little did I know that in a matter of hours I'd be fighting for my life, trapped in a place I once considered mundane and safe. My name's Carlos, and I've been the night janitor at Oak Ridge for the past 5 years. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and lets me work on my novels during the quiet hours. I know every nook and cranny of this place, from the CEO's corner office on the top floor to the musty supply closets in the basement. But on that fateful night, even my intimate knowledge of the building wouldn't be enough to keep me safe. It started like any other shift. I arrived at 10 p.m. just as the last of the workaholics were trudging out to their cars. I nodded to Marjorie from accounting as she passed, her arms full of files she was probably taking home to work on. She gave me a tired smile in return. Another late night, Marjorie I asked, holding the door open for her. "You know how it is during tax season, Carlos," she sighed. "See you tomorrow." If only I'd known those might be the last words we'd ever exchange. I started my rounds on the top floor, working my way down, vacuumed the carpets, emptied the trash, wiped down the surfaces. It was mindless work, leaving my imagination free to wander. I was deep in thought about the plot of my latest story when I heard a crash followed by muffled cursing. I froze, my hand still on the handle of the vacuum cleaner. The sound had come from downstairs, maybe the third or fourth floor. My first thought was that Marjorie had come back for something she'd forgotten, but Marjorie didn't curse like that. Cautiously, I made my way to the stairwell. The emergency lights cast long shadows as I descended, my heart pounding louder with each step. As I reached the fourth floor landing, I heard voices, low, urgent whispers that definitely didn't belong to anyone who should be in the building at this hour. I eased the door open just a crack, peering into the darkened office space. What I saw made my blood run cold. 3 men dressed all in black were methodically going through the desks and filing cabinets. They moved with purpose, clearly looking for something specific. One of them held a small flashlight, its beam dancing across the room as they searched. Intruders, thieves, and here I was alone in the building with them. I let the door close silently, my mind racing. I needed to call the police, but my cell phone was in my locker in the basement. The landlines on this floor would be useless. The phone system automatically shut down after hours to prevent long-distance abuse. I had to get to the security office. On the ground floor, it had a separate phone line and direct access to the police. As quietly as I could, I started down the stairs. I had just reached the 3rd floor when I heard the stairwell door above me open. They were coming down. Panic surged through me. I yanked open the 3rd floor door and ducked inside, praying they hadn't seen me. I could hear their footsteps echoing in the stairwell as they descended. "Check this floor," I heard one of them say. "We need to find those files." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. I looked around frantically for a place to hide. The open office layout left few options, but then I spotted it, the supply closet. I darted across the room, wincing at every footfall that seemed to echo in the silence. I had just closed the closet door behind me when I heard them enter. The floor pressed against the back wall of the closet, surrounded by the smell of cleaning products and paper. I tried to steady my breathing. Through the slats in the door I could see flashlight beams sweeping across the office. "Nothing here," one of them growled after what felt like an eternity. "Let's try the next floor." I waited until I couldn't hear their footsteps anymore before allowing myself to breathe normally, but I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to get to that security office. Easing the closet door open, I peered out into the darkness. The floor seemed empty. I crept towards the stairwell, every nerve on high alert. I had just reached the stairs when I heard a shout from above. "Hey, there's someone down there." They'd seen me. I ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I flew down towards the ground floor. I could hear them behind me, their heavy footfalls echoing off the concrete walls. I burst out of the stairwell and into the main lobby. The security office was just across the atrium. I was halfway there when a figure stepped out in front of me. I skid to a stop, nearly falling in my haste to change direction. The man lunged for me, but years of maneuvering around office furniture with my cleaning cart had made me nimble. I ducked under his grasp and sprinted for the elevators. I jabbed the call button repeatedly, knowing it was useless. The elevators were shut down for the night, but next to the elevators was a door marked maintenance. Beyond it, a ladder that led to the roof. I yanked the door open and started climbing, my arms burning with the effort. Above me, I could hear the maintenance door slam open again. They were following me up. I reached the roof access hatch and pushed it open, gulping in the cool night air as I pulled myself up onto the gravel-covered roof. Stars twinkled overhead, oblivious to the drama unfolding below them. I ran to the edge of the roof, looking for a way down. There was none. I was trapped. The hatch banged open behind me. I turned to see the 3 men climbing onto the roof, their faces twisted with anger and exertion. Nowhere to run now. One of them sneered, advancing towards me. I backed up until I felt the low wall at the edge of the roof against my legs. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't Know who you are or what you want, but I won't say anything, just let me go." The man in the lead, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with a scar running down his cheek, laughed. "Sorry, pal, can't take that risk." He lunged at me. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. I saw his hand reaching for me, saw the malice in his eyes, and I made a decision. I vaulted over the low wall. For a heart-stopping moment, I was in free fall. Then my feet hit something solid. The window washing platform left in place by the crew. Earlier that day, I heard shouts of surprise from above. As I frantically worked the controls, the platform lurched into motion, slowly descending the side of the building. But I wasn't safe yet. I could see one of the men leaning over the edge of the roof, taking aim with what looked like a gun. I pressed myself against the side of the building as the first shot pinged off the metal platform. The second shot shattered one of the support cables. The platform tipped dangerously, and I had to grab onto the railing to keep from falling. I was still 4 stories up, too high to jump. That's when I saw a window left open on the 3rd floor. It was a long shot, but it was my only chance. As the platform swung wildly, I timed my move. 1 second, 2, 3. I leapt. For a moment, I thought I'd miscalculated. Then my hands caught the windowsill. Pain shot through my arms as I hauled myself inside, collapsing onto the floor of an empty office. I didn't allow myself a moment to rest. I could hear commotion in the stairwell. They were coming down after me. I ran for the elevators. They were still powered down, but there was an emergency phone inside. I wrenched open the doors and grabbed the phone. 911, what's your emergency? I've never been so glad to hear those words in my life. The next few minutes were a blur. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher, hidden in the elevator, until I heard the beautiful sound of police sirens approaching. The would-be thieves were caught trying to flee the building. It turned out they were after confidential client information that could have ruined lives if it had fallen into the wrong hands. As I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket around my shoulders, I watched the men being led away in handcuffs. One of them, the scarred leader, caught my eye as he was put into a police car. The look he gave me sent chills down my spine. I gave my statement to the police, then went home to my worried wife and sleeping kids. As I hugged them tight, I realized how close I'd come to never seeing them again. I don't work nights anymore. The company offered me a day position with better pay, partially out of gratitude, partially out of guilt for the lack of security that had put me in danger. Sometimes when I'm leaving the office in the evening and I see the night janitor starting his shift, I feel a pang of something, fear, sympathy. I'm not sure I want to warn him, to tell him to be careful, to always be on why, but I don't. I just nod and smile and hope that his nights will be quieter than mine were. And as I drive home, I'm grateful for the mundane, for the ordinary, because I know now how quickly it can all change, how thin the line is between routine and terror. And I never ever take an uneventful night for granted again. The soft glow of the TV flickered in the darkened living room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Little Timmy had been asleep for hours, and I was settling in for a quiet night of babysitting. But as I absent-mindedly scrolled through my phone, a message popped up that made my blood run cold. In that moment, I realized this ordinary suburban home had become the stage for a terrifying game of cat and mouse. My name's Amy, and I've been babysitting for the Johnsons for about 6 months now. They're good people with a sweet kid, and the gig helps pay for my college textbooks. It was supposed to be just another Friday night job, but it turned into the most horrifying experience of my life. The evening had started normally enough. I arrived at 7:00 p.m. just as Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were heading out for their date night. Timmy, their 8-year-old son, was already in his pajamas, eager to show me his latest Lego creation. "Now, Amy," Mrs. Johnson said as she put on her earrings, "Timmy's allowed 1 hour of tablet time before bed. The parental controls are on, so he should only be able to access his games and approved websites." I nodded, having heard the spiel before. "No worries, Mrs. Johnson will be fine." If only I'd known how wrong I was. After the Johnsons left Timmy and I had dinner, he chatted excitedly about school and his friends, and I listened with half an ear, smiling and nodding at the right moments. Around 8 p.m. I handed him his tablet for his allotted screen time. "Remember, just 1 hour, buddy," I said. "Then it's bedtime." Timmy nodded, already engrossed in whatever game he was playing. I settled onto the couch with my own phone, scrolling through social media and texting friends. At 9:00 p.m. I told Timmy it was time for bed. He grumbled a bit, but handed over the tablet without too much fuss as I tucked him and he seemed a little quieter than usual. "Everything okay, Timmy?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Amy, is it okay to have secret friends?" Something about the way he said it made me uneasy. "What do you mean by secret friends, Timmy?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Just someone I talk to sometimes, but it's a secret." Alarm bells started ringing in my head. "Timmy, who is this secret friend? How do you talk to them?" But Timmy had clammed up. He rolled over, pulling the covers up to his chin. "Never mind. Good night, Amy." I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should I press him for more information, call his parents? In the end, I decided to check the tablet first. Maybe I was overreacting. Back in the living room, I unlocked the tablet. At first glance, everything seemed normal, just the usual games and child-friendly apps. But then I noticed an app one didn't recognize. It looked like a harmless puzzle game with a colorful icon of interlocking blocks. When I opened it, my heart dropped. It wasn't a game at all, but a messaging app, and there in the chat history was a conversation that made my skin crawl. The messages were from someone calling themselves Game Master Mike. At first they seemed innocent enough, talking about games and school, but as I scrolled the tone changed. "Remember, Timmy, this is our secret. Don't tell your parents or your babysitter. I can't wait to meet you in person. It'll be so much fun. I'll be coming to see you very soon, maybe even tonight." My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the tablet. This wasn't just some online predator grooming a child from afar. This Mike was planning to come here tonight. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, when a message popped up on the screen. It was from an unknown number. "Hello, Amy, Timmy's asleep now, isn't he? Why don't you let me in so we can surprise him?" Terror washed over me in an icy wave. He was here outside at the house watching. I ran to the windows, making sure they were all locked. I could see nothing but darkness outside, but I felt exposed, vulnerable. I quickly drew all the curtains. My mind was racing. I needed to call the police. Wow, but what if he heard me? What if he decided to break in before help could arrive? Another message pinged on my phone. "Come on, Amy, don't be rude. I've come all this way." I muted my phone, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had to protect Timmy. I had to think. I crept upstairs, wincing at every creak of the floorboards. Timmy was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger. I gently shook him awake. "Timmy," I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm, "we need to play a game. It's called hide and seek, but we have to be very, very quiet, okay?" Timmy nodded, still half asleep. I led him to his parents' room, to the walk-in closet I knew was there. "You hide in here," I said, pushing aside hanging clothes to reveal a small space at the back. "Don't come out until I come get you, no matter what you hear, okay? It's very important." Timmy nodded again, his eyes wide. He could sense my fear. I think even if he didn't understand it. I closed the closet door, then the bedroom door, hoping it would be enough to keep him safe. Back downstairs, I grabbed the largest knife from the kitchen. It felt awkward and heavy in my hand, but it was better than nothing. Another message on my phone. "I'm getting impatient, Amy. Maybe I'll just let myself in." I heard a noise from the back of the house, the sound of the patio door sliding open. He was inside. I pressed myself against the wall next to the kitchen doorway, knife raised, barely daring to breathe. I could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the house. "Timmy," a man's voice called softly. "It's me, Game Master Mike. I've come to play." The footsteps were getting closer. I could see a shadow approaching the kitchen doorway. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. I saw a hand appear around the door frame, then an arm, then a shoulder. Without thinking, I swung the knife. There was a yell of pain and surprise. The man stumbled back, clutching his arm where I'd slashed him. He was tall, heavy-set, with a scraggly beard and wild eyes, nothing like the friendly persona he'd created online. "You little," he snarled, lunging at me. I dodged, but he was faster than I expected. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing until I dropped the knife. It clattered to the floor. We grappled. His strength overwhelming me, he slammed me against the wall, knocking the wind out of me. His hand found my throat, squeezing. "Where's he?" He growled. "Where's Timmy?" I clawed at his hand, gasping for air. Black spots were dancing at the edges of my vision. This was it. I thought I was going to die. Then, through the roaring in my ears, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Police sirens. The man's grip loosened in surprise, and I took my chance. I brought my knee up hard, catching him in the groin. He doubled over With a grunt of pain and I shoved past him, I ran for the front door, yanking it open just as a police car screeched to a halt in the driveway. "Help," I screamed. "He's inside." The next few minutes were a blur. Police officers swarmed the house. The man, whose real name I later learned was Gerald Hoffman, was tackled trying to escape through the back door. Timmy was found safe in the closet, scared but unharmed. As I sat in the back of an ambulance answering a detective's questions, I watched them lead Hoffman away in handcuffs. He caught my eye as they put him in the police car, and the look he gave me was pure hatred. I shuddered, knowing that if the police hadn't arrived when they did, things could have ended very differently. It turned out that one of the neighbors had seen a strange man lurking around the house and called the police. I've never been so grateful for nosy neighbors in my life. The Johnson arrived home to a scene of chaos, police cars and ambulance, their house a crime scene. They were horrified by what had almost happened, and incredibly grateful that I had protected Timmy. In the days that followed, as the story hit the local news, I was hailed as a hero, but I didn't feel like one. I felt scared, violated, and angry at Hoffman for preying on an innocent child, angry at myself for not realizing sooner what was happening, angry at the world for being a place where such monsters exist. I don't babysit anymore. The trauma of that night left scars that are still healing, but I did start volunteering for an organization that teaches kids about online safety. If I can prevent even one child from going through what Timmy almost did, maybe some good can come from that terrifying night. Every time I pass the Johnsons and house, I remember the fear, the adrenaline, the moment I thought it was all over, but I also remember that I survived, that I protected Timmy, and I know that no matter how dark the world can be, there's always hope as long as there are people willing to stand up to the darkness. The acrid smell of chemicals burned my nostrils as I crouched behind a fallen tree, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give away my position. What had started as a peaceful hiking trip had turned into a desperate fight for survival. I never imagined that stumbling upon a hidden meth lab deep in the woods would put me and my friends in mortal danger, but here we were being hunted like animals in a forest that had suddenly become our prison. My name's Alex, and I've always loved the outdoors, so when my friends Jake and Sarah suggested a weekend hiking trip in the Ozarks, I jumped at the chance. We were all experienced hikers, confident in our ability to handle whatever nature threw our way, but nature, as it turned out, wasn't the threat we needed to worry about. We set out early Friday morning, the air crisp and filled with the promise of adventure. The trail we'd chosen was off the beaten path, recommended by a local guide as a challenging but rewarding trek for the first day and a half. It was exactly that. We navigated steep inclines, crossed babbling streams, and marveled at the lush canopy above us. It was late Saturday afternoon when things took a turn. We had veered slightly off the marked trail, following what looked like a game path in search of a good spot to set up camp for the night. "Guys, do you smell that?" Sarah asked, wrinkling her nose. I sniffed the air. There was definitely an odd odor, sharp and chemical. It reminded me of the time I'd accidentally left a can of paint thinner open in my garage. "Maybe there's a factory nearby," Jake suggested, but he sounded uncertain. We should have turned back then, but curiosity got the better of us. We pressed on, following the strengthening scent as we pushed through a dense thicket. The trees suddenly opened up into a small clearing. What we saw made us freeze in our tracks. In the middle of the clearing stood a dilapidated cabin, but it wasn't the building that caught our attention. It was the collection of equipment scattered around it: plastic containers, tubing, propane tanks, and other paraphernalia that I'd only ever seen on crime shows. "Holy," Jake whispered. "Is that what I think it is?" Before either Sarah or I could respond, we heard voices, rough, angry voices coming from inside the cabin. "Get down," I hissed, dropping to the ground behind a fallen log. Jake and Sarah followed suit. Our bodies pressed into the damp earth. Through a gap in the log, I could see two men emerge from the cabin. They were arguing about something, supplies. I think they looked nothing like the stereotypical meth cooks I'd seen on TV. These guys were burly with hard eyes and clothes that had seen better days, and they were armed. "We need to get out of here," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded slowly. starting to back away, but as I moved, my backpack caught on a branch. The resulting snap seemed to echo through the clearing. The men's heads whipped in our direction. What was that? One of them growled, "Probably just an animal," the other replied, but he didn't sound convinced. We lay there barely breathing, praying they wouldn't investigate further. For a moment it seemed like luck was on our side. The men turned back to their conversation. Then Jake sneezed. It wasn't loud, but in the tense silence it might as well have been a gunshot. "There's someone out there," one of the men shouted. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We scrambled to our feet and ran crashing through the underbrush with no regard for stealth. Behind us I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. Split up, I yelled to Jake and Sarah, "Meet back at the car if you can." It was a risky move, but I hoped it would confuse our pursuers. I veered left while Jake and Sarah went right. I ran like I'd never run before, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but fear kept me going. I could hear someone behind me gaining ground. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw one of the men, his face twisted with rage, not 20 yards behind me. In my moment of distraction, my foot caught on a route. I went down hard, tumbling down a small incline. Pain shot through my ankle as I tried to get up. "Got you now, you little bastard," the man snarled, emerging from the trees above me. In desperation, I grabbed a handful of dirt and leaves and threw it at his face. He cursed, momentarily blinded, and I used that moment to stumble to my feet and keep running. The pain in my ankle was excruciating, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I had no idea where I was going, no plan beyond getaway. As I ran, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees were denser here, the undergrowth thicker. It was getting darker too, the sun setting behind the mountains. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Every sound made me flinch. Was it my pursuer or just the natural noises of the forest? Finally, when I felt I couldn't take another step, I sought a small cave half hidden by a curtain of vines. Without hesitation, I dove inside. The cave was shallow, more of an overhang really, but it was enough. I pressed myself against the back wall, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. Outside I could hear movement, heavy footsteps, branches snapping. "He was close. I know you're around here somewhere," the man called out. His voice was closer than I expected, and I had to stifle a gasp. I closed my eyes, willing myself to become invisible. The footsteps drew nearer, then paused right outside my hiding spot. For a moment that felt like an eternity, there was silence. I didn't dare breathe. Then mercifully, the footsteps started to move away. I waited until I could no longer hear any sound before allowing myself to relax slightly. But I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to find Jake, and Sarah had to get help as quietly as I could. I eased myself out of the cave. The forest was dark now, the trees casting long shadows in the fading light. I had no idea which direction to go, but I knew I couldn't go back the way I'd come. I picked a direction and started walking, trying to favor my injured ankle. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every rustling leaf had me looking over my shoulder. After what felt like hours of aimless wandering, I heard something that made my heart leap, the sound of running water, a stream, and if I could find the stream, I might be able to find my way back to the trail. I followed the sound, hope giving me renewed energy. As I pushed through a deep, dense patch of undergrowth, I suddenly found myself face to face with Sarah. We both stifled screams of surprise, then hugged each other fiercely. "Oh my God, Alex," Sarah whispered. "I thought I didn't know if I'm okay." I assured her, though okay was a relative term at this point. "Have you seen Jake?" She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "We got separated. I've been hiding, trying to figure out what to do together. We decided to follow the stream. It had to lead somewhere, and it was our best chance of finding our way out of this nightmare. We walked through the night, jumping at every sound, expecting to see one of our pursuers behind every tree. As dawn broke, we finally heard something that filled us with relief and dread in equal measure, the distant sound of vehicles. Cautiously we approached the sound. Through the trees we could see a road, and on that road a welcome sight, police cars. It turned out that Jake had managed to find his way back to our car and had immediately driven to the nearest town to get help. The police had been searching for us all night as we were escorted to safety. I looked back at the forest Somewhere in there were dangerous men in their illegal operation, but they'd be found soon enough. Our ordeal had ensured that the aftermath was a blur of police statements and medical checks. The meth lab was raided, the men arrested. We were hailed as heroes by the local media, though it certainly didn't feel heroic at the time. It took a long time for the nightmares to stop, for me to be able to hear a twig snap without flinching. But eventually I found my way back to the trails. The forest, once a place of peace and adventure, had shown me its darker side, but it had also shown me my own strength, my will to survive. Now when I hike, I carry with me the knowledge that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, but I also carry the certainty that I can face that danger and overcome it. The forest may hide secrets, some of them deadly, but it can't hide the human spirit's capacity for survival. The golden light of sunset painted the forest in warm hues, but a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. As I peered through my camera's viewfinder, I caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't be there, a pair of gleaming eyes watching me from the shadows. In that moment, I realized I had become the prey, and the hunter was unlike anything I had ever encountered before. My name is Jack, and I'm a wildlife photographer. I've spent years tracking and photographing some of the most elusive creatures on the planet, from the snow leopards of the Himalayas to the jaguars of the Amazon. I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to face in the remote wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. I'd come to this particular stretch of old-growth forest following rumors of an undocumented species. Local tribes spoke of a creature that walked on two legs, but was covered in fur with eyes that glowed in the dark, most dismissed as folklore. But I've learned over the years that legends often have a kernel of truth. For days I'd been setting up camera traps and staking out promising locations. I'd seen nothing but the usual wildlife: deer, elk, the occasional black bear. But as the sun began to set on my fifth day in the forest, everything changed. I was perched in a tree, blind, my camera ready, watching a small clearing where I'd noticed unusual tracks earlier. The light was fading fast, and I was considering packing up for the night when I heard an hollow guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My heart rate spiked, but years of experience kept me still. I raised my camera, scanning the tree line through my telephoto lens. That's when I saw them, two eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight set in a face that was almost but not quite human. I snapped a series of shots, instinctively the camera's shutter sounding unnaturally loud in the hushed forest. As soon as I lowered the camera, the eyes were gone, but I could still feel its presence, watching, waiting. With trembling hands, I checked the photos I'd just taken. Most were blurry, useless, but the last one was crystal clear. What I saw made my blood run cold. The face was a plike, but with an intelligence in its eyes that was undeniably sentient. This was no known animal, this was something else entirely. As darkness fell, I knew I had to get out of there. Whatever this creature was, it was clearly aware of me, and I didn't want to find out if it was as curious about me as I was about it. I began to pack up my gear as quietly as possible, all too aware of the rustling sounds coming from the underbrush around me. Just as I was about to descend from my perch, a blood-curdling screech pierced the night. It was close, too close. I froze, one hand on the tree trunk, the other clutching my camera bag. The forest had gone deathly quiet, as if every living thing was holding its breath. Then I heard the sound of something large moving through the forest, heading straight for my tree. Panic surged through me. I dealt with charging elephants and stalking tigers, but always from a safe distance or with guides nearby. Here I was alone, and whatever was coming was unlike anything in my experience. I scrambled down the tree, no longer car carrying about stealth. As soon as my feet hit the ground, I ran. I had no plan, no direction in mind. Pure instinct drove me forward, crashing through undergrowth, leaping over fallen logs behind me. I could hear it pursuing. The creature moved with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional snap of a branch or rustle of leaves. It was toying with me. I realized with growing horror it could have caught me at any time, but it was DRO drawing it out the chase. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving in the darkness. I could barely see where I was going. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to tripped me with every step, but I didn't dare slow down. Suddenly the ground disappeared from beneath my feet. I plunged forward, tumbling down a steep embankment. Pain shot through my body as I rolled, unable to stop my descent. When I finally came to a stop, I lay there for a moment, dazed and winded. The sound of rushing water filled my ears. I had landed near a river. As I struggled to my feet, wincing at the pain in my ankle, an idea struck me. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to rely heavily on scent. If I could cross the river, I might be able to throw it off my trail. I limped towards the sound of water, my eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness. The river loomed before me, a black ribbon cutting through the forest. It was wide and fast-moving, far more dangerous than I had hoped, but I could hear movement in the forest behind me. I was out of options. Taking a deep breath, I waded in the icy water, took my breath away. But I pushed forward. The current tugged at my legs, threatening to sweep me away. By the time I reached the middle, the water was up to my chest. My C camera bag felt like it weighed a ton, dragging me down. Just as I thought I wouldn't make it, my feet found purchase on the other side. I dragged myself onto the bank, soaked and shivering, but I couldn't rest yet. I had to put more distance between myself and whatever was chasing me. I stumbled through the forest, my wet clothes clinging to me, my teeth chattering. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a potential pursuer. But gradually I realized I couldn't hear anything following me anymore. As the adrenaline began to wear off, exhaustion set in. I needed to find shelter to rest and try to figure out where I was. In the dim pre-dawn light, I spotted a large hollow log. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. I crawled inside, curling up as best I could. As I lay there shivering and aching, I thought about the photos in my camera. If I had managed to capture what I thought I had, it would change everything. But at what cost was any discovery worth this terror? I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the gaps in the log. For a moment I was disoriented, then the memories of the night before came flooding back. Cautiously I peeked out of my hiding place. The forest looked different in the daylight, less menacing, more familiar, but I knew appearances could be deceiving. Whatever had chased me last night could still be out there. I checked my GPS unit, relieved to find it had survived the river crossing. I was about 5 miles from my campsite. It would be a tough hike with my injured ankle, but I had no choice. I needed to get back to civilization to show someone the photos I had taken. The journey back was a blur of pain and paranoia. Every snapping twig made me flinch, every rustling leaf had me looking over my shoulder, but nothing appeared. No glowing eyes, no inhuman shrieks, just the normal sounds of a forest going about its day. When I finally stumbled into my campsite, I almost wept with relief. My tent was still there, untouched. I quickly packed up, my hands shaking with exhaustion and lingering fear. I needed to get out of these woods, back to my car, back to safety. The hike to the trailhead was the longest 2 miles of my life. When I finally saw my beat-up Land Rover, I could have kissed it. I threw my gear in the back and peeled out of there, not caring about the dust cloud I was kicking up. It wasn't until I was miles away, the forest, nothing but a green smudge in my rearview mirror, that I allowed myself to relax. I had made it, I had survived, but as the fear faded, excitement began to take its place. I had seen something extraordinary, something that could rewrite our understanding of the natural world. And I had proof. As soon as I had cell service, I called my editor, Mark. I said, my voice horror from exhaustion and emotion. You're not going to believe what I've got. The photos caused a sensation. Of course, scientists, cryptozoologists, and curiosity seekers descended on the forest, but despite extensive searches, no one ever found concrete evidence of the creature I encountered. Sometimes in the dead of night, I still wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of that unearthly shriek ringing in my ears. I've never gone back to those woods, and I never will. Some mysteries I've learned are better left unsolved, but I'll never forget the night I became the quarry, hunted by something that shouldn't exist. It changed me, reminded me that in the grand scheme of things, humans are not always the apex predator, and somewhere out there in the depths of the forest, something is watching, waiting, reminding us that there are still wild places in the world where we are not in control. The first scratch in the wall was so faint I almost missed it, but as I traced my fingers over the rough surface, a chill ran down my spine. Something was in the wall of this old cabin, something alive and moving, and as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, I realized with growing horror that I was trapped here with whatever it was. My name's Daniel, and I've always been a bit of a loner, so when I inherited my great-uncle's cabin in the woods, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for some peace and quiet. I'd been feeling burnout from my job in the city, and the idea of spending a few weeks surrounded by nature was incredibly appealing. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits, a small rustic structure nestled in a clearing miles from the nearest neighbor. As I pulled up in my rental car, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. I could almost smell Great Uncle Frank's pipe tobacco and hear his deep rumbling laugh. The first few days were blissful. I hiked during the day, marveling at the lush forest and the crystal clear streams. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch with a book, listening to the chorus of crickets and watching the fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. It was on the fourth night that I first heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from inside the walls. At first I dismissed it as mice. The cabin was old after all, and it wasn't surprising that some critters might have made their home in it. But as I lay in bed that night, the scratching grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be moving, traveling from one wall to another. This was no mouse. The next morning I examined the walls carefully. That's when I found the first scratch marks, long deep gouges in the wooden panels. They were too big to be from any rodent I knew of. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a raccoon that had somehow gotten into the walls, but deep down I knew that didn't fit. The scratch were too deliberate, too purposeful. As the day wore on, I found myself jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. The scratching had stopped, but the silence felt oppressive, like the calm before a storm. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, every nerve on high alert, waiting for the sound to start again. When it did, it was different. Not just scratching now, but a soft thudding, like something heavy moving through the walls. I got up, grabbing a flashlight from the bedside table. My hands were shaking as I shone the beam along the walls. The scratching seemed to be coming from behind the old fireplace. As I approached, the noise stopped abruptly. I stood there, heart pounding, straining my ears in the silence. Then I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold, a low guttural growl coming from inside the wall. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. This was no animal, at least no animal I'd ever encountered. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, jumping at every sound. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, I was in my car driving towards town. The local diner was just opening when I arrived. I must have looked a sight, pale, disheveled, with dark circles under my eyes. The waitress, a kindly older woman named Betty, took one look at me and brought over a strong cup of coffee. "You all right, honey?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed nervously. "Not a ghost," I said, "but something. I'm staying at my uncle's old cabin, and there's something in the walls." Betty's expression changed. A flicker of, "Was that Fair Frank old place?" she asked. "Up on Willow Creek Road." I nodded, surprised. "You knew my uncle?" she sighed, glancing around the empty diner before sliding into the booth across from me. "Everyone around here knew Frank," she said, "and everyone knows about that cabin." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" Betty leaned in, lowering her voice. "There's always been stories about that place, even before your uncle bought it. People say it's not right, that there's something living in the wall, something that's been there for a long time." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What kind of something?" She shook her head. "Nobody knows for sure. Some say it's a spirit angry at being disturbed. Others think it's some kind of creature hibernating for years at a time. Your uncle, he never believed the story, said it was just superstition." I thought about the scratches, the growl I'd heard. "It's real," I said. "Whatever it is, it's real." Betty reached out, patting my hand. "Listen, honey, if I were you, I'd pack up and leave. Some things it's better not to mess with." But I couldn't just leave. The cabin was mine now, my responsibility, and a part of me, the part that had always been drawn to mysteries and the unknown, wanted to know what was hiding in those walls. I spent the day in town researching the cabin's history and buying supplies, including a sturdy axe. As the sun began to set, I steeled myself and drove back up to the cabin. The scratching started as soon as night fell, but this time I was prepared, or so I thought. I approached the wall where the sound was loudest, axe in hand. With a deep breath, I swung the blade, biting into the old wood. The scratching stopped abruptly. For a moment there was complete silence, then a roar that shook the very foundations of the cabin. The wall in front of me bulged outward, wood splintering. I stumbled back, raising the axe defensively. But I wasn't prepared for what emerged. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, vaguely humanoid, but covered in thick matted fur. Its eyes glowed in the dim light, fixed on me with an intelligence that was terrifyingly unnatural. For a moment we stared at each other, frozen in mutual shock. Then it lunged. I swung the axe wildly, feeling it connect with something solid. The creature howled a sound of pain and rage that sent me scrambling towards the door, but it was faster. A clawed hand grabbed my ankle, pulling me down. I kicked out, my foot connected ing with its face. It let go, and I scrambled to my feet, running for the car. I could hear it behind me, its heavy breathing, and the thud of its footsteps spurring me on. I reached the car, fumbling with the keys. Just as I got the door open, it slammed into me from behind. We went down in a tangle of limbs, rolling across the forest floor. Its face was inches from mine, hot breath reeking of decay. I could see my terrified reflection in its glowing eyes. In desperation, I grabbed a rock from the ground and smashed it against the creature's head. It reared back, momentarily stunned. I took my chance, scrambling into the car and locking the doors. The engine roared to life, and I floored tires spinning on the dirt road. In the rearview mirror, I could see the creature standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. Its hollow frustration followed me all the way down the mountain. I didn't stop driving until I reached the city limits. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I never went back to the cabin. I sold it at a loss to a developer who planned to tear it down. I didn't tell him about what lived in the walls. Maybe I should have, but who would have believed me? Sometimes late at night, I still wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of that unearthly howl ringing in my ears. I'll never forget those glowing eyes, that ancient alien intelligence, and I can't help but wonder if there was one of those creatures. Could there be more? How long have they been hiding in the walls of old houses, in the dark places we never think to look? One thing's for certain, I'll never look at an old cabin in the woods the same way again, because now I know that sometimes the walls really do have eyes and claws and an appetite for unsuspecting visitors. The neon sign flickered ominously as I pulled into the parking lot of the Starlight Motel. Little did I know that checking in for the night would be the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't supernatural beings, but the seemingly ordinary people we encounter in our daily lives. My name's Sarah, and I've always been a bit of a restless soul. I was on a cross-country road trip trying to find myself, or whatever it is that people say doing when they don't know what to do with their lives. It was late, I was exhausted, and the Starlight Motel was the first place I'd seen in miles that looked like it might have a vacant room. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a couple of beat-up trucks and my own dusty sedan. As I killed the engine, I noticed the curtain twitching in the office window. Someone had been watching me pull, and the office bell jangled. As I pushed open the door, behind the counter stood a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite, all hard angles and cold eyes. His name tag read Earl. "Need a room?" I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Earl's eyes roamed over me in a way that made my skin crawl. "Just you?" he asked, his voice raspy like he'd swallowed gravel. I nodded, suddenly wishing I wasn't alone. "Got a single on the end, $30 cash only." As I counted out the bills, I could feel Earl's eyes on me. When I looked up, he was smiling. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Enjoy your stay," he said, handing me a key attached to a plastic fob shaped like a star. My room was at the far end of the motel, away from the office and the other occupied rooms. As I unlocked the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The room was about what you expect for $30 a night: a sagging double bed, a TV that looked older than me, and a bathroom that had seen better days. But it was a place to sleep, and that's all I needed. I was just about to collapse onto the bed when I noticed something odd. There was a small hole in the wall about eye level, partially hidden behind a tacky landscape painting. I peered closer. It Looked like it went right through to the next room. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly covered the hole with the painting, trying to convince myself it was just damage from a previous guest's sleep. Didn't come easily that night. Every creak and groan of the old building had me on edge, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there were eyes on me. Even though I'd covered the hole, I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke with a start in the early hours of the morning. Something had woken me, but I wasn't sure what. Then I heard a soft scratching sound coming from the wall. My heart began to race. I lay there, hardly daring to breathe, straining my ears in the darkness. The scratching continued, sometimes stopping for a few seconds before starting again. Suddenly a shaft of light appeared on the wall. The painting was moving. I watched, paralyzed with fear, as the painting slowly shifted to one side. The hole in the wall was exposed, and pressed against it was an eye. I must have made a sound, a gasp or a whimper, because the eye suddenly widened, then disappeared. I heard hurried footsteps moving away. That got me moving. I leapt out of bed, throwing on my clothes and shoving my belongings into my bag. I had to get out of there. As I burst out of my room, I nearly collided with someone. It was Earl, standing right outside my door. "Everything all right, miss?" he asked, his voice far too calm for someone who'd just been caught peeping. "I'm leaving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Now Earl's face hardened. "Now don't be hasty. It's the middle of the night, not safe for a young woman to be driving alone." He took a step towards me, and I noticed for the first time how big he was, how he seemed to block out the light from the parking lot. "Stay away from me," I warned, fumbling in my bag for my car keys. That's when I saw the glint of metal in his hand. "A knife. Can't let you leave, Miss," Earl said, his voice almost regretful. "You've seen too much." I didn't think, I just reacted. I swung my bag at his face with all my strength. He staggered back, momentarily stunned, and I ran. I could hear him behind me, his heavy footsteps pounding on the concrete. I reached my car, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Just as I wrenched the door open, a hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. Earl loomed over me, his face twisted with rage. "You shouldn't have done that," he growled. I saw the knife coming towards me, and I did the only thing I could think of. I brought my knee up hard right between his legs. Earl doubled over with a grunt of pain, the knife clattering to the ground. I shoved him as hard as I could, sending him sprawling, and dove into my car. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, tires squealing. As I peeled out of the parking lot, in my rearview mirror I could see Earl staggering to his feet, growing smaller as I sped away. I drove for hours, my heart pounding, jumping at every set of headlights I saw. It wasn't until the sun started to rise that I finally felt safe enough to pull over at a busy truck stop. My hands were shaking as I picked up my phone to call the police. I told them everything about the hole in the wall, Earl's behavior, the knife. They took my statement and assured me they'd investigate. As it turned out, I wasn't the first person to have a terrifying experience at the Starlight Motel. The police investigation uncovered a history of missing persons cases linked to the motel going back years. They found evidence that Earl had been spying on guests through holes in the walls, choosing his victims carefully, those he thought wouldn't be missed. Solo travelers, runaways, people down on their luck. In the end, they arrested Earl and his wife, who had been his accomplice. The full extent of their crimes was never made public, but the rumors were horrifying. I gave more statements, testified at the trial. It was a long and draining process, but I was determined to see justice done, not just for me, but for all of Earl's victims who couldn't speak for themselves. It's been years since that night at the Starlight Motel, but I still have nightmares. Sometimes I see Earl's cold eyes, feel the terror of being hunted. I can't stay in motels anymore. The sight of those identical doors, those neon vacancy signs, it all brings it rushing back. But I've grown stronger too. I've learned to trust my instincts, to listen to that little voice that says something isn't right, and I've learned that sometimes the most ordinary looking places and people can hide the darkest secrets. I still travel, still explore, but now I do it with my eyes wide open, always aware that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. And every time I pass a rundown motel on a lonely stretch of highway, I say a silent prayer for those who might be trapped inside, fighting battles that no one knows about, because the truth is you never really know what's happening behind closed doors, or who might be watching from the other side of the wall. The moment I saw the ornate mask, something deep within me screamed danger, but surrounded by the laughter and music of the Halloween party, I pushed the feeling aside. If only I'd listened to that instinct, because as the night wore on, I realized those Masks weren't just hiding faces, they were concealing murderous intentions. My name's Alex, and I've always loved Halloween, the costumes, the atmosphere, the way reality seems to bend just a little on that one magical night. So when my friend Jen invited me to EXP exclusive Halloween bash at some rich guy mansion, I jumped at the chance. It's going to be epic. Jen had gushed over the phone, this guy goes all out, and get this, it's a masquerade theme. Everyone has to wear a mask the whole night, isn't that cool? It did sound cool, mysterious. Even I spent weeks putting together the perfect costume, a steampunk-inspired outfit complete with a bronze and leather mask that covered the top half of my face. The night of the party, Jen picked me up in her beat-up Corolla. As we drove out of the city, the houses got bigger and farther apart. Finally, we turned down a long tree-lined driveway. Holy! I breathed as the mansion came into view. It was massive, all Gothic spires and gargoyles like something out of a horror movie. Jack-o'-lanterns lined the steps, their flickering light casting eerie shadows told you it was epic. Jen grinned, adjusting her feathered mask. Inside, the party was already in full swing. The foyer was packed with people in elaborate costumes, all wearing masks that ranged from simple dominoes to intricate full-face creations. Music pulsed from hidden speakers, and waiters in skeleton makeup circulated with trays of drinks and hors d'oeuvres. Wow, I said, taking it all in. Who did you say was throwing this party again? Jen shrugged. Friend of a friend. Come on, let's get a drink. We made our way to the bar, squeezing past a group of people in animal masks. As the bartender mixed our drinks, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I turned to see a tall figure in a red cloak and a white beaked mask, like something a plague doctor would wear, staring at me. At least I thought they were staring. It was hard to tell with the mask. Creepy costume, I muttered to Jen. She followed my gaze. Oh yeah, I've seen a few of those around. I think they're part of the staff, where something really adds to the atmosphere, right? I nodded, but couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. As the night went on, I started to notice more of the red cloak figures. They never spoke, never danced, they just watched. Every time I spotted one, that feeling of unease grew stronger. I was just about to suggest to Jen that we leave when the music suddenly cut out. The crowd fell silent as a man in an ornate golden mask stepped onto a small stage at one end of the room. Welcome, honored guests, he said, his voice smooth and cultured. I hope you're enjoying the festivities, but now it's time for the main event. A murmur ran through the crowd. This hadn't been mentioned on the invitation. As you may have noticed, the man continued, some of our guests are wearing rather special masks. He gestured to one of the red cloak figures. These individuals have been chosen for a very important role in tonight's entertainment. The man clapped his hands, and suddenly the red cloak figures were moving. They converged on the crowd, grabbing people seemingly at random. I watched in horror as they dragged struggling partygoers towards the exits. What the hell? Jen gasped beside me. Before I could respond, I felt a hand clamp down on my arm. I turned to see one of the red cloak figures looming over me. No, I yelled, trying to pull away, but their grip was like iron. All around, chaos had erupted. People were screaming, running, trying to fight off the masked assailants, but there were too many of them, and they moved with a cold efficiency that spoke of planning and practice. I lost sight of Jen in the mayhem. The figure in the red cloak was dragging me towards a door I hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a tapestry. I fought every step of the way, but it was useless. As we neared the door, I heard the man in the golden mask speak again, his voice cutting through the panic. Don't be afraid, he said, sounding almost amused. Think of it as a game, a very high-stakes game of hide-and seek. If you can evade our hunters until dawn, you win your freedom. If not, well, let's just say the consequences will be rather permanent. My blood ran cold as the implications of his words sank in. This wasn't a party, it was a hunt, and we were the prey. The red cloak figure shoved me through the door. I stumbled, nearly falling down a narrow flight of stairs. When I looked back, the door had already slammed shut. I was in some kind of cellar, dimly lit by flickering torches. Other partygoers were there too, all looking as terrified as I felt. Some were crying, others were pounding on the door. We'd come through, we have to get out of here, someone said, their voice shaking. But how? Another responded, they'll be guarding the exits. As if in answer, a section of the far wall ground open. revealing a dark passageway. Your hunt begins now. The golden masked man's voice echoed from hidden speakers. You have until dawn. Good luck. For a moment no one moved, then as if a spell had been broken, everyone rushed for the passage. I hesitated, wondering if it was a trap, but what choice did I have? I plunged into the darkness, the sounds of panicked breathing and hurried footsteps all around me. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes splitting into multiple routes. I tried to keep track of where I was going, but it was hopeless. This place was a maze. After what felt like hours of wandering, I found myself in a large circular room passages LED off in all directions, and in the center stood a fountain, dry and covered in cobwebs. I wasn't alone. A handful of other partygoers were there, all looking as lost and scared as I felt. One of them, a guy in a wolf mask, was examining the fountain. I think I figured it out, he said as I approached this place. It's not just a basement, it's a whole network of tunnels and rooms, like a mini city under the mansion. But why? A woman in a butterfly mask asked. Why go to all this trouble? Before anyone could answer, we heard footsteps coming from one of the passages, and with them a sound that made my blood run cold, the soft metallic scrape of a blade being drawn. Run, someone yelled, and we scattered, each diving for a different passage. I ran blindly, my heart pounding in my ears behind me. I could hear screams echoing through the tunnels. I wanted to help, but the instinct for survival overrode everything else. I don't know how long I ran or how many twists and turns I took. Eventually I found myself in a small deadened room. There was nowhere else to go. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I had to think. I looked around the room, desperate for anything that might help. That's when I noticed a small grate near the floor, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. I didn't hesitate. I pried the grate open and crawled inside. It was a tight fit, and the metal was cold against my skin, but I didn't care. Anything was better than being caught by those masked killers. I crawled through the duct for what felt like miles, every sound making me freeze in terror. Finally, I saw light ahead. I emerged into what looked like a garage filled with expensive cars, and there, like a beacon of hope, was a door marked exit. I ran for it, half expecting it to be locked, but it opened easily, and suddenly I was outside, the cool night air hitting my face. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road. Only then did I allow myself to collapse, gulping in great lungfuls of air. I had escaped, but as police sirens began to wail in the distance, I thought of all those still trapped in that underground maze. How many of them would see the dawn? The aftermath was a blur of police statements and news reports. The man behind it all, a wealthy recluse with a twisted sense of entertainment, was arrested, but many of his hunters were never caught. They never found Jen or many of the others who went missing that night. The tunnels under the mansion went on for miles. They said some bodies might never be recovered. I still have nightmares about that night, about masks hiding in human eyes, about running through endless dark tunnels, but mostly I dream about the ones I left behind, and I wonder if I'd been braver, could I have saved them? Halloween isn't fun for me anymore, because now I know that sometimes the monsters aren't just people in costumes. Sometimes they're all too real, and sometimes they win. The mist rolled across the lake, thick and impenetrable, as I cast my line into the inky black water. I'd come out here for solitude, for peace. Instead, I found a nightmare floating in the fog, a ghost ship that would turn my quiet fishing trip into a fight for survival against an unspeakable evil. My name's Mike, and I've been fishing these waters since I was a kid. Lake Erie might not be the most glamorous of the Great Lakes, but it's always been my sanctuary. When life gets too hectic, too noisy, I come out here, just me, my little fishing boat, and the vast expanse of water. That night started like any other. I'd pushed off from the dock just as the sun was setting, planning to do some night fishing. The weather report had mentioned fog rolling in, but I wasn't worried. I knew these waters like the back of my hand. As darkness fell, the fog grew thicker than I'd ever seen it. I could barely see the bow of my own boat, but I wasn't concerned. The fish were biting, and the eerie calm of the fog-shrouded lake was soothing in its own way. It was close to midnight when I first heard it, a low, mournful sound echoing across the water. At first I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but then I heard it again, louder this time. A ship's horn, but unlike any I'd heard before. It sounded old, rusted, like something that hadn't been used in a very long time. I peered into the fog, straining my eyes. That's when I saw a massive shape looming out of the mist. As it drew closer, I could make out more details. It was a ship, all right, but not like any that should have been on Lake Erie. This was an old steamer, the kind they used to use for hauling iron ore back in the early 1900s. Its hull was rusted, its deck empty of any signs of life. My first thought was that it must be some kind of historical recreation, but as it drifted closer, I realized something was very, very wrong. The ship was moving silently, with no sound of engines or sight of crew, and there was something off about it, like I was looking at it through a heat haze. Even in the cool night air, curiosity overrode my growing sense of unease. I started my engine, moving closer to the mysterious ship. As I drew alongside, I could make out the name painted on the hull: Edmund Fitzgerald. My blood ran cold. The Edmund Fitzgerald was infamous in these parts, a massive ore freighter that had sunk in a storm on Lake Superior in 1975, taking all 29 crew members with it. What I was looking at was impossible. I was about to turn my boat around and get the hell out of there when I heard a voice calling out from the deck of the ghost ship. "Help us," it cried, weak and desperate. "Please help us." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to flee, but I couldn't just leave. If there was someone in trouble, swallowing my fear, I maneuvered my small boat alongside the towering hull of the freighter. There was a rusted ladder hanging down the side. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed hold and started to climb. The metal was ice cold under my hands, covered in a slick layer of algae that made the climb treacherous. As I hauled myself onto the deck, the full weight of my mistake hit me. The deck was empty, devoid of any signs of life, but more than that, it felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy with a scent I couldn't quite place, like rust and seaweed and something else, something rotten. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vast emptiness of the ship. "Is anyone here?" I heard a call for help. Silence was my only answer. I took a step forward and nearly fell as the deck seemed to shift under my feet. It wasn't the gentle roll of waves, it was as if the very structure of the ship was unstable, changing. That's when I saw them, shadowy figures moving at the edges of my vision. Every time I turned to look directly at one, it would vanish, but I could feel them watching me, their unseen eyes boring into my back. I knew I needed to get off the ship, and fast, but as I turned back to where I'd climbed aboard, my heart sank. The ladder was gone. The edge of the deck now hung over empty air, fog swirling below where my boat should have been. Panic started to set, and I was trapped on a ghost ship, surrounded by something, entities I couldn't see, but could feel all around me. I had to find another way off. I made my way towards what I hoped was the bridge, figuring there had to be some kind of radio or emergency equipment there. The door was rusted shut, but adrenaline gave me the strength to wrench it open. The bridge was like stepping back in time. Ancient-looking equipment lined the walls, dials and levers that looked like they belonged in a museum. In there, slumped over the ship's wheel, was a figure. Hope surged through me. "Hey," I called out, moving closer. "Are you all right?" The figure didn't move. As I approached, I realized why what I had thought was a person was nothing but a skeleton, clothed in the tattered remains of a captain's uniform. I stumbled back, a scream caught in my throat. This was madness, impossible. I had to be dreaming. A noise behind me made me whirl around. There, blocking the doorway, stood a man, but now a living man. His flesh was bloated and pale, his eyes milky white. Seaweed clung to his clothes and water dripped constantly from his form. "Welcome aboard," he said, his voice gurgling as if he were speaking underwater. "We've been waiting for you." I backed away, my mind reeling. What are you?" The thing that had once been a man smiled, revealing rows of sharp fish-like teeth. "We are the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald, lost but not gone, and now you'll join us." More figures appeared behind him, all in various states of decay. They began to advance into the bridge, their hands outstretched towards me. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I grabbed a heavy logbook from a nearby desk and hurled it at the lead figure. It passed right through him, but the action startled them enough for me to make a break for it. I shoved past them, their cold, wet hands grasping at me. As I ran, I could hear them behind me, their waterlogged footsteps pounding on the deck. I ran without direction, taking random turns through the labyrinthine interior of the ship. Every door I passed through seemed to lead somewhere different than it should have, as if the internal geography of the vessel was constantly shifting. Finally I burst out onto the deck again, but it wasn't the same deck I'd first climbed onto. This one was tilted at a sickening angle, water sloshing over one side. With a jolt of horror I realized the ship was sinking. The ghostly crew was still behind me, getting closer. In desperation I ran for the railing, and without allowing myself time to think, I jumped. The shock of the cold water drove the air from my lungs. For a moment I was sure I was going to drown, but then my survival training kicked and I fought my way to the surface, gasping for air. The ghost ship was gone. There was nothing but fog all around me. I treaded water, trying to get my bearings. That's when I heard the distant sound of a motor. I shouted for help, my voice hoarse and desperate. The sound grew closer, and suddenly a beam of light cut through the fog. It was a coast guard boat. As they pulled me from the water, I babbled about the ghost ship, the undead crew. The Coast Guard officers exchanged worried glances, clearly thinking I was delirious. It wasn't until later, after I'd been checked out at a hospital and declared physically fine, that I learned the truth. There had been a rash of disappearances on the lake over the past few months, all on foggy nights, all in the same general area where I'd had my encounter. The official report ruled it mass hallucination, possibly caused by some kind of toxic algae bloom, but I know what I saw, what I experienced. I don't go out on Lake Erie anymore, can't bring myself to set foot on a boat, but sometimes on foggy nights I find myself drawn to the shore, and as I stand there watching the mist roll, and I swear I can hear it, the low mournful sound of the Edmund Fitzgerald's horn calling out across the water, calling for new souls to join its damned crew. And then I wonder how many more will answer that call before the ghost ship is finally laid to rest. The howling wind drowned out the sputtering of my car's engine as it finally gave up. The ghost surrounded by a whiteout of swirling snow. I realized I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. Little did I know my desperate search for shelter would lead me into the clutches of a madman, and the cozy cabin I thought was my salvation would become a prison of terror. My name's Claire, and I've always prided myself on being prepared, but nothing could have prepared me for that night. I was driving back from a work conference, taking the scenic route through the mountains. It was supposed to be a peaceful drive, a chance to decompress before diving back into the chaos of city life. The storm came out of nowhere. One minute I was admiring the snow-capped peaks, the next I could barely see 2 feet in front of me. I slowed to a crawl, my knuckles white on the steering wheel as I struggled to keep the car on the road. That's when I heard a sickening clunk from under the hood. The car shuddered, coughed, and died. I coasted to a stop on the shoulder, if you could call it that. On one side was a sheer rock face, on the other a steep drop off into darkness. I tried to restart the engine, but it was no use. The battery was dead, and even if it wasn't, I suspected the problem was much worse. I was stuck. I reached for my phone, already knowing it was futile. No signal, of course not out here in the middle of nowhere. The temperature was dropping rapidly. I could see my breath fogging up the windshield. I knew I couldn't stay in the car in weather like this. That was a death sentence. I had to find shelter, grabbing my emergency kit. Thank God I'd remembered to pack one. I stepped out into the storm. The wind hit me like a physical force, nearly knocking me off my feet. Snow pelted my face sharp as needles. I picked a direction and started walking, one arm up to shield my eyes from the driving snow. Every step was a battle against the wind. I couldn't feel my fingers or toes, and my face was numb with cold. Just when I thought I couldn't go, and I saw a faint glow in the distance, a light. My heart leapt. Where there was light, there had to be people, shelter. I pushed on with renewed energy. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth and safety. I stumbled up to the door and pounded on it with frozen fists. Hello, I shouted, my voice nearly lost in the howling wind. Please, I need help. For a long moment there was nothing, then I heard movement inside. The door creaked open and I found myself face to face with a man. He was tall and lean, with a wild beard and eyes that seemed to glow in the lamplight. He looked at me with surprise, then concern. Good Lord, miss, he said, his voice gravy. What are you doing out in this storm? Coming. I all but fell through the doorway, the sudden absence of wind making me stumble. The man caught me, his hand strong and sure. Thank you, I gasped, shivering violently. My car broke down. I didn't know what to do. You poor thing, he said, leading me to a chair by the fireplace. You're half frozen. Here, let me get you something warm To drink as feelings slowly returned to my extremities, I took in my surroundings. The cabin was cozy, if a bit cluttered. Books and papers were strewn everywhere, and the walls were covered in maps and diagrams. I couldn't make sense of. The man returned with a steaming mug. "It's just tea," he said, handing it to me, "but it'll warm you up." I took a grateful sip. "I'm Claire," I said. "Thank you so much for helping me. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found your cabin." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Jack," he said, "and think nothing of it. I couldn't very well leave you out there to freeze, could I?" As we talked, I began to relax. Jack seemed nice enough, if a bit odd. He told me he was a researcher studying weather patterns in the mountains. That explained all the maps and equipment I could see scattered around. "The storm's not likely to let up until morning," he said, glancing out the window. "You're welcome to stay here for the night. I'm afraid I don't have a guest room, but the couch is comfortable enough." I hesitated. Staying the night in a stranger's cabin wasn't ideal, but what choice did I have? "That's very kind of you," I said. "If you're sure it's no trouble at all," Jack said, that strange smile back on his face. As the night wore on, my unease grew. There was something off about Jack, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The way his eyes would linger on me when he thought I wasn't looking, the way he'd sometimes pause mid-sentence, as if listening for something. I tried to shake it off. He'd saved my life after all. I was just being paranoid. It wasn't until I got up to use the bathroom that I realized how wrong I was. As I walked down the narrow hallway, I noticed a door that was slightly ajar. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, except I heard a sound coming from inside, a muffled thump like someone moving around. My curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open a little wider and peered inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The room was some kind of workshop filled with strange equipment and jars of unidentifiable substances, but that wasn't what caught my attention. There, strapped to a table in the center of the room, was a person. They were gagged and bound, their eyes wide with terror as they struggled against their restraints. I must have made a sound, because suddenly Jack was there, his hand clamping down on my shoulder. Now, he said, his voice eerily calm, "You shouldn't go poking around in other people's business, CLA." I tried to run, but his grip was like iron. He dragged me into the room, ignoring my struggles. "I really wish you hadn't seen this," he said, forcing me into a chair. "Things could have been so much simpler." As he tied me up, he kept talking, his voice taking on a manic edge. "You don't understand. None of you understand. The storms, they're not natural. There's something out there, something in the mountains. I'm trying to stop it. Don't you see?" I didn't see. All I saw was a madman, a monster wearing the face of my rescuer. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Let us go. We won't tell anyone, I swear." Jack just shook his head. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You're part of it now, part of the experiment." The next few hours were a blur of terror. Jack moved between us, injecting us with something that made the room spin. In our minds fog, he muttered, constantly scribbling notes and adjusting equipment through the haze. I tried to think of a way out. The ropes were tight, but maybe if I could work them loose. I don't know how long it took, but finally I felt the ropes give. Jack was focused on his other victim, his back to me. It was now or never. I lunged from the chair, grabbing the nearest object, a heavy glass jar, and brought it down on Jack's head with all my strength. He went down hard, crumpling to the floor. I didn't wait to see if he was out cold. I untied the other person, a hiker I learned later who'd gone missing weeks ago, and we ran. The storm had passed. The world outside, blanketed in pristine white snow, we stumbled through drifts, the cold biting at our skin, but fear kept us moving. It wasn't until we reached the main road and flagged down a passing truck that I finally allowed myself to believe we were safe. The aftermath was a blur of police statements and hospital visits. They found Jack's cabin, but he was long gone. The things they discovered there, I try not to think about it. They never caught him. Sometimes, when the wind howls outside my window, I imagine I can hear his voice whispering about experiments and things in the mountains. I don't drive those back roads anymore. I don't go anywhere remote if I can help it, because now I know that sometimes the real monsters aren't in the storm outside. Sometimes they're waiting behind a friendly smile, ready to turn your salvation into a nightmare. And in those moments when you're most vulnerable, most in need of help, that's when they strike. So be careful who you trust in the dark, in the cold. You never know What's really waiting behind that cabin door? The crack of a twig snapping underfoot echoed through the forest, freezing us in our tracks. We'd come to these woods for a peaceful camping trip, but in that moment I realized we'd stumbled into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The hunters had become the hunted, and our fight for survival was about to begin. My name's ER, and I've always loved the great outdoors, so when my boyfriend Tom suggested a weekend camping trip deep in the Ozark National Forest, I jumped at the chance. We'd been planning this getaway for months, poring over maps and plotting the perfect route to take us far from the usual tourist trails. We set out early on a crisp Friday morning, our backpacks loaded with supplies and our hearts full of excitement. The first day was everything we'd hoped for: challenging hikes through pristine wilderness, breathtaking views, and the kind of solitude you can only find miles away from civilization. As the sun began to set, we found the perfect spot to make camp: a small clearing near a babbling brook sheltered by towering pines. We set up our tent, built a fire, and sat down to enjoy a simple dinner of trail mix and dehydrated camping meals. "This is perfect," Tom said, his face glowing in the fur light. "Just us and nature, no cell phones, no internet, no distractions." I nodded, taking in the peacefulness of our surroundings. The stars were starting to come out, brighter than I'd ever seen them in the city. It was magical. We were just about to turn in for the night when we heard voices carried on the wind. At first I thought it might be other campers, but something about the tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Tom must have sensed it too. Stay here," he whispered, grabbing our flashlight. "I'm going to check it out." I wanted to protest, to tell him we should both go, or neither of us should, but before I could say anything he disappeared into the darkness. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. The voices grew louder, then suddenly cut off. The silence that followed was deafening. Just as I was about to go looking for Tom, he burst back into our campsite, his face pale with fear. "We need to go," he said, already starting to break down the tent. "Now what? Why? What did you see?" I asked, my heart racing. Tom's hands were shaking as he stuffed our sleeping bags into their sacks. "Poachers," he said, "at least 3 of them. They've got guns, Sarah, big ones, and they didn't look like the type to ask questions." First my blood ran cold. Poaching was a problem in these parts, but I'd never thought we'd actually run into any. "Did they see you?" I asked, helping Tom pack up our gear as quietly as possible. He shook his head. "I don't think so, but they're close, too close. We need to get out of here." We doused our fire and shouldered our packs. Tom took one last look at our GPS before stowing it away. "There's a ranger station about 10 miles north of here," he said. "If we push hard, we can make it by morning." With only the dim light of the moon to guide us, we set off into the forest. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every rustle of leaves a potential enemy. We moved as quickly and quietly as we could, but in the darkness it was slow going. We'd been walking for maybe an hour when we heard it, the unmistakable sound of voices and heavy footsteps. Behind us, the poachers had found our campsite, and now they were on our trail. "Run," Tom whispered, grabbing my hand. We took off, no longer caring about stealth. Branches whipped at our faces as we crashed through the underbrush. I could hear the men behind us, their voices angry and getting closer. Suddenly the ground disappeared from under my feet. Tom and I tumbled down a steep embankment, landing hard at the bottom. Pain shot through my ankle. As I tried to stand, "I think it's sprained," I gasped, leaning heavily on Tom. He looked back up the slope, his face grim. "We can't outrun them now. We need to hide." Tom helped me limp to a dense thicket of bushes. We crawled inside, pulling our dark-colored packs in after us. I bit my lip to keep from crying out as Tom gently examined my ankle. In the dim light, "It's swollen," he whispered, "but I don't think it's broken. We'll need to wrap it once we're safe." The voices were getting closer. I held my breath as flashlight beams swept the area where we'd fallen. "They've got to be around here somewhere," one of the men growled. "Find them. We can't let them report US." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. Tom's arm tightened around me, and I buried my face in his chest, afraid even my breath might give us away. The poachers searched for what felt like ours, their lights probing every shadow, their voices growing more frustrated by the minute. Finally they moved on, the sound of their footsteps fading into the distance. We waited until we couldn't hear them. At All before daring to move. Tom helped me out of the thicket, his face etched with worry in the pre-dawn light. We need to keep moving, he said. They'll be back once the sun's up. Using a branch as a makeshift crutch, I hobbled along as Tom led the way. We stuck to the densest parts of the forest, using every bit of cover we could find. Every snapping twig, every bird call made us freeze, certain we were about to be discovered. As the sun rose, painting the forest in shades of gold and green, we heard the poachers again. They were spread out now, sweeping the area in a system of icy search. We were running out of places to hide there, Tom whispered, pointing to a rocky outcropping ahead. If we can make it up there, we might be able to see the ranger station. It was a difficult climb, made worse by my injured ankle. Tom practically carried me the last few yards, but when we reached the top, the view took my breath away. Miles of unbroken forest stretched out before us, and there in the distance was a plume of smoke rising above the trees. That has to be it, I said, hope surging through me for the first time since this nightmare began. But our relation was short-lived. A shout from below told us we'd been spotted. The poachers were coming, and we were trapped. We'll have to climb down the other side, Tom said, his voice tight with tension. It's steep, but it's our only chance. The descent was terrifying. Loose rocks slid under our feet, and more than once I thought we were going to fall, but somehow we made it to the bottom. We could hear the poachers cursing as they tried to follow us down. It bought us precious time, but we knew it wouldn't be long before they caught up. The ranger station seemed to get no closer, no matter how fast we moved. My ankle was on fire, each step sending jolts of pain up my leg, but the sound of pursuit kept me going. We burst out of the tree line into a small clearing. The ranger station stood before us, a simple wooden structure that looked like salvation. Help, Tom shouted, pounding on the door. Please, someone help us. For a heart-stopping moment there was no response. Then the door flew open, revealing a startled-looking ranger. What in the world, he began, but Tom cut him off. Poachers, he gasped. They're right behind us. They've got guns. The ranger's expression hardened. He ushered us inside and locked the door, then grabbed a rifle from a rack on the wall. Stay here, he said, moving to the window. I've called for backup, but it'll take time for them to get here. The next few minutes were tense. We could hear the poachers approaching, their voices raised in anger as they realized where we'd gone. The ranger stood his ground, ordering them to drop their weapons. For a moment I thought there would be a shootout, but faced with an armed official, the poachers' nerve broke. They fled back into the forest just as the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the trees. The aftermath was a blur of police statements and medical attention for my ankle. The poachers were caught a few days later trying to flee the state. Tom and I never did finish our camping trip, but in a way we got more adventure than we bargained for. We saw firsthand the dark side of nature, not the animals or the elements, but the human predators who exploit the wilderness for their own gain. We still go camping, but now we're more cautious. We know that even in the most beautiful places danger can lurk, but we also know that we're stronger together, that we can face whatever comes our way. And sometimes when we're sitting around a campfire under the stars, we remember that night, not with fear, but with a sense of pride. We survived, we protected each other, and in doing so we found a strength in ourselves we never knew we had. The moment I stumbled upon the first makeshift grave, I knew my peaceful hiking trip had turned into a nightmare. The forest floor was disturbed, unnatural mounds dotting the landscape like gruesome landmarks. As I stood there frozen in horror, one thought echoed through my mind. I had just walked into a serial killer's dumping ground, and I needed to get out before I became the next victim. My name's Alex, and I've always been an avid hiker. There's something about losing myself in nature that helps clear my head and puts life into perspective. So when I had a few days off work, I decided to tackle a new trail in the Cascade Mountains, one that was off the beaten path and promised solitude and breathtaking views. The first day of my hike was everything I'd hoped for. The trail was challenging but rewarding, winding through dense forests and opening up to stunning vistas of snow-capped peaks. I set up camp that night feeling accomplished and at peace, looking forward to what the next day would bring. I broke camp early the next morning, eager to cover more ground. The trail became less defined as I pushed deeper into the wilderness mob, but I wasn't worried. I had my GPS and plenty of experience navigating rough terrain. It was late after afternoon when things took a turn. I had veered slightly off the main trail, Following what looked like a game path in search of a good spot to set up camp for the night, that's when I saw a patch of ground that looked wrong. The earth was mounded up in an unnatural way, and there were withered flowers scattered on top. My curiosity overrode my caution. I approached the mound, my heart racing. As I got closer, I noticed other details: a piece of fabric poking through the dirt, what looked horribly like strands of hair. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This was a grave afresh. One, and it wasn't alone. As I looked around with new eyes, I could see other mounds scattered throughout the area, some older and more overgrown than others. Panic surged through me. I needed to get out of there, to contact the authorities, but as I turned to leave, a twig snapped somewhere behind me. I froze, and straining my ears, it could have been an animal, I told myself, but deep down I knew it wasn't moving. As quietly as I could, I crept towards a large boulder, hoping to use it as cover. I had just ducked behind it when I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps coming closer. "I know you're out there," a voice called out. It was a man's voice, deceptively calm and almost friendly. "No use hiding, why don't you come out so we can talk?" I held my breath, pressing myself against the cold stone of the boulder. My mind was racing. Should I make a run for it, try to reason with him? I had no weapon, nothing to defend myself with except my wits. "I'll come on now," the voice continued, closer now. "I promise I won't hurt you. I just want to explain. You're right, I'd seen enough crime shows to know how this would go. He'd try to lure me out to get me to trust him, and then I'd end up in one of those shallow graves." I peered around the edge of the boulder, trying to get a glimpse of my stalker. What I saw made my blood run cold. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in hunting gear, and he was carrying a rifle. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't outrun a bullet, but maybe I could outsmart him. I grabbed a rock from the ground and threw it as hard as I could in the opposite direction. The sound of it crashing through the underbrush had the desired effect. The man whirled towards the noise, his rifle raised. "I see you," he shouted, starting to move away from me. I took my chance. I burst from my hiding spot and ran, not caring about the noise I was making. I could hear him cursing behind me, then the sound of pursuit. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through undergrowth, leaping over fallen logs. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging cuts, but I didn't slow down. I could hear him behind me getting closer. My lungs were burning, my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me going. I had no idea where I was running to, only that I needed to get away. Suddenly the ground disappeared from under my feet. I tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling and bouncing painfully before coming to a stop at the bottom. For a moment I lay there dazed, and when did the sound of sliding rocks above me snapped me back to reality. He was coming down after me. Ignoring the pain radiating through my body, I forced myself to my feet and started running again. The forest was denser here, the undergrowth thicker. It slowed me down, but it would slow him down too. I pushed through, ignoring the thorns that tore at my clothes and skin. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning, but eventually I burst out of the tree line and found myself on a road, an actual paved road. Hope surged through me. Where there was a road, there had to be people, civilization, safety. I turned in what I hoped was the direction of the nearest town and started running again. Every few seconds I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see my pursuer emerging from the trees. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I saw headlights approaching. I waved my arms frantically, praying the driver would stop the car. An old pickup truck slowed to a stop beside me. An elderly man peered out at me, his face creased with concern. "You all right, miss?" he asked. "Please," I gasped, fighting to catch my breath. "I need help. There's a man. He's after me. Please, can you take me to the police?" The old man's eyes widened, but he nodded, reaching over to unlock the passenger door. "Get in," he said. As we drove away, I kept looking back, half expecting to see the killer standing in the middle of the road watching us drive away, but there was nothing but empty asphalt stretching behind us. The rest of the night was a blur of police statements and medical checks. I told them everything about the graves, the chase, the terror of thinking I was going to die out there in the wilderness. They found the site I described, uncovering multiple bodies in various states of decomposition. It was, they told me, the work of a serial killer who had been active in the area for years. They never caught him though. He vanished into the vast wilderness, leaving behind only his grisly handiwork and the nightmares of those who encountered him. I don't go hiking alone anymore, can't bring myself to it, not after what happened. The forest, once a place of peace and solitude for me, now feels full of hidden dangers. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the undergrowth sets my heart racing. But I haven't given up on nature entirely these days. I stick to popular trails, always with a group, and I've become an advocate for hikers' safety, sharing my story as a cautionary tale, because the truth is the wilderness can be dangerous in ways we don't always consider. It's not just the terrain or the wildlife we need to be wary of. Sometimes the most dangerous predators out there are the ones that walk on two legs. I often think about that day, about how close I came to becoming just another victim, another body in a shallow grave. It's a sobering thought, but also a reminder of my own strength and resilience. I survived, I outsmarted killer and lived to tell the tale, and while the experience left its scars, both physical and emotional, it also taught me something important. Life is precious and every moment is a gift. I don't take anything for granted anymore. Each sunrise, each breath, each step on a trail, they're all reminders that I'm alive, that I made it out of those woods when others didn't. So I keep walking, keep exploring, always with one eye on the path ahead and the other watching my back, because you never know what's lurking just beyond the next bend in the trail. The first time I saw the girl with the haunted eyes, I knew something was terribly wrong, but I never imagined that my night shift at a remote truck stop would thrust me into the dark underbelly of human trafficking. As I stood behind the counter watching the steady stream of truckers and late-night travelers, I had no idea that I was about to uncover a sinister operation that would change my life forever. My name's Jack, and I've been working the graveyard shift at Big Rig's truck stop for about 6 months now. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills and gives me plenty of quiet time to work on my novel. At least that's what I thought it would do. The night everything changed started like any other. I clocked in at 11 p.m. nodding to Dave, the day shift guy, as he headed out. The first few hours were uneventful, a steady trickle of truckers coming in for coffee, snacks, and a chance to stretch their legs. It was around 2 a.m. when I first saw her. A young girl, couldn't have been more than 16 or 17, walked in with a much older man. Something about the way she moved, the way she kept her eyes down, set off alarm bells in my head. The man marched her straight to the restrooms at the back of the store. Wait here, I heard him growl before he came up to the counter. Pack of smokes, he grunted, not meeting my eyes. As I turned to grab the cigarettes, I caught a glimpse of the girl in the security mirror. She was standing exactly where the man had left her, but her eyes were darting around frantically like a cornered animal looking for escape. I handed the man his cigarettes, trying to keep my voice casual as I asked, "Everything okay with your daughter?" His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Mind your own business," he snarled, snatching the pack from my hand and stalking back to the girl. I watched as he roughly grabbed her arm and dragged her out of the store. My stomach churned. Something was very, very wrong. Over the next few weeks I saw more girls like her, always young, always with older men who treated them more like property than people. I started paying closer attention, noticing patterns. The same trucks would show up at odd hours. Men would exchange hushed words and knowing glances. I knew I had to do something, but I was scared. What if I was wrong? What if I was seeing things that weren't there? And even if I was right, what could I, a simple night clerk, do against what was clearly a large organized operation? It was a quiet Tuesday night when things came to a head. A Big Rig pulled in around 3 a.m. and I recognized the driver as one of the regulars I'd been watching. He came in alone, but when he left he had 2 young girls with him. They looked drugged, barely able to walk straight. My heart was pounding as I watched them climb into the truck. This was it. I couldn't stand by any longer. With shaking hands, I picked up the phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I took a deep breath. I think I've uncovered a human trafficking ring operating out of Big Rig's truck stop on Highway 20. The dispatcher's voice sharpened. Can you elaborate, sir? I told her everything I'd seen over the past few weeks, describing the girls, And then the patterns I'd noticed as I spoke. I kept my eyes on the security cameras watching the parking lot. Units are on their way, the dispatcher assured me. Is there anything else you can tell us? Just then I saw movement on one of the screens. A van had pulled up and men were ushering more girls into it. They're moving them now, I said urgently. There's Van. Suddenly the bell over the door jangled. I looked up to see one of the men I'd been watching walk. And our eyes met, and I knew he'd heard me. I have to go, I whispered into the phone, hanging up quickly. The man's eyes narrowed as he approached the counter. Who are you talking to? He demanded. Just my girlfriend, I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. She worries if I don't check. And he didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes come out from behind the counter. He said, his hand moving to his waistband where I caught a glimpse of a gun. My mind raced. I couldn't let him take me outside. I'd seen enough crime shows to know I'd never come back at if I did. Look, I said, raising my hands, I don't want any trouble. I don't know anything, and I haven't seen anything. Okay, he smirked, a cold, humorless expression. Oh, I think you've seen plenty. Now move. Or he never finished the sentence. At that moment, the parking lot lit up with red and blue flashing lights. The man's head whipped around, his face contorting with rage. You little rat, he snarled, reaching for his gun. I didn't think, I just reacted. I grabbed the pot of hot coffee from behind me and hurled it at him. He screamed as the scalding liquid hit his face. When stumbling backwards, I vaulted over the counter and ran for the door. Outside it was chaos. Police cars had swarmed the parking lot. Officers were shouting orders, their guns drawn. The van I'd seen earlier was trying to back out, but a police cruiser blocked its path. I burst out of the store, my hands raised. I'm the one who called, I shouted as several officers turned their weapons towards me. One of them rushed over quickly, ushering me behind a police car. Stay down, he ordered before running back towards the store. From my position I could see everything. The men were being arrested, pulled from their trucks in the van, and the girls, God, there were so many of them. Some looked dazed, others were crying. A few tried to run, only to be gently but firmly stopped by female officers. It was over in minutes, but it felt like hours. When the dust settled, one of the detectives came to take my statement. As I talked, I watched paramedics treating the girls, wrapping them in blankets and leading them to waiting ambulances. You did good, son, the detective said when I'd finished. Real good. We've been trying to crack this ring for months. Your information was the break we needed. I nodded, feeling numb. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. What's going to happen to the girls? I asked. The detective's face softened. They'll get help, counseling, medical treatment, whatever they need. It's going to be a long road, but they've got a chance now. Thanks to you. In the days that followed, the full scope of the operation came to light. It wasn't just big rigs. The ring had been operating out of truck stops across 3 states. Dozens of girls were rescued, some of whom had been missing for years. I gave more statements, testified in court. The truck stop's owner was arrested too. He'd been turning a blind eye. In exchange for a cut of the profits, I was offered a reward, but I couldn't take it. Instead, I asked for it to be donated to organizations that help trafficking survivors. I don't work at big rigs anymore. Couldn't stand to be there after everything that happened. But I didn't give up on my dream of being a writer. In fact, I found my story. I'm writing about what happened, about the girls, about the dark world that exists right under our noses. Sometimes I think about that first girl, the one with the haunted eyes. I never found out what happened to her specifically, but I like to think she's out there somewhere, free, maybe even happy. And on the nights when the memories keep me awake, when I see those girls' faces in my dreams, I hold on to that thought, because that's the thing about evil. It thrives in the shadows and silence and complacency, but it only takes one person to shine a light, to speak up. One person can make a difference. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who was in the right place at the right time and chose not to look away. And if my story teaches people anything, I hope it's this: pay attention, look out for each other, and if you see something wrong, say something. You never know whose life you might save. The crumbling facade of Ravenswood Asylum loomed before me, its broken windows staring down like hollow eyes. I'd come here looking for thrills, for that perfect creepy photo to boost my urban exploration. blog. Instead, I found myself trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted through decaying corridors by those who should have been long, long gone. Sometimes the dead don't rest easy, and the insane never truly leave. My name's Maya, and I've always been drawn to abandoned places. There's something hauntingly beautiful about a building left to decay, nature slowly reclaiming what man has discarded. I run a fairly popular blog showcasing my urban exploration adventures, and when I heard about Ravenswood, I knew it would be my masterpiece. The asylum had been abandoned for decades, shut down after a series of scandals involving patient abuse and unethical experiments. Local legends spoke of hauntings, of screams echoing through the empty halls at night. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I believed in the power of a good story. I arrived just before sunset, my camera bag heavy on my shoulder. The fence surrounding the property was rusted and been easy enough to slip through. As I approached the main building, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. The front door hung off its hinges, creaking ominously in the breeze. I flicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing peeling wallpaper and debris-strewn floors. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. I moved deeper into the building, my camera clicking away. Every shadow, every broken piece of furniture told a story. I imagined the lives that had been lived and lost within these walls. It was as I was setting up a shot in what must have been a patient room that I first heard a shuffling sound coming from the corridor outside. I froze, listening intently. It could have been the building settling, I told myself, or maybe an animal that had found its way inside. But then I heard something else, a voice, faint and distant, calling out, "Hello, is someone there? Please, I need help." My heart started racing. Had another urban explorer gotten hurt, or was this some kind of trap against my better judgment? I moved towards the sound. "Hello," I called out. "Where are you?" The voice came again, closer this time. "Here, I'm here. Please help me." I rounded a corner and my flashlight beam fell on a figure huddled against the wall. It was a young woman dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned hospital gown. She squinted in the sudden light, raising a hand to shield her eyes. "Oh, thank God," she said. "I thought no one would ever come." Something fell off her clothes, her manner of speaking. It was all wrong, but she looked so scared, so vulnerable. "Are you hurt?" I asked, taking a step closer. "How did you get here?" She stood up slowly, keeping her eyes down. "They brought me here," she said softly. "The doctors, they said they were going to make me better." A chill ran through me as the implications of her words sank in. This wasn't possible. The asylum had been closed for years. Unless I raised my camera, snapping a quick picture. The flash illuminated the corridor for a split second, and what I saw in that moment of clarity made my blood run cold. The woman was transparent. I could see the wall behind her through her body. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. "What are you?" I gasped. Her head snapped up, and I saw her eyes were completely black. A terrible smile spread across her face, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Were the ones they left behind," she said, her voice suddenly deep and inhuman. "And now you're going to join us?" I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan, just turned and fled back the way I'd come. Behind me I could hear her laughing, the sound echoing off the walls. As I raced through the corridors, more voices joined hers. Whispers and screams seemed to come from everywhere at once. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, figures darting just out of sight. I burst into what must have been the main hall, a vast space with a grand staircase leading to upper floors, and there, blocking my path to the exit, stood a group of people. Some wore patient gowns, others the uniforms of orderlies and nurses. All of them had the same black eyes, the same terrible smiles. "Welcome home," one of them said, a tall man in a doctor's coat. "We've been waiting for you." I backed away, my eyes darting around for another escape route. "This isn't real," I said, more to myself than to them. "You're not real." The doctor laughed, a chilling sound. "Oh, we're very real, my dear, more real than you can imagine. We've been trapped here for so long, waiting for someone like you, someone to set us free." They began to advance, their movements jerky and unnatural. I turned and ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps thundering on the old wood. The upper floors were a maze of corridors and rooms. I ran blindly, no longer sure which way was out. Every turn brought me face to face with more of them patients with vacant eyes, nurses with bloody uniforms, doctors wielding rusted scalpel. I found myself in what must have been a treatment room. Old electroshock machines stood silent witness to past horrors. The only way out was a small window barely big enough for a person to fit through. As I struggled to open the rusted latch, the door burst open behind me. The spirits poured in, their cold hands reaching for me. With a final desperate shove, the window gave way. I didn't hesitate. I dove through the opening, feeling the old glass scrape against my skin. For a heart-stopping moment I was falling, then I hit the overgrown shrubbery below, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Ignoring the pain, I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the fence, practically diving through the gap I'd used to enter. Only when I was back in my car, doors locked and engine running, did I allow myself to breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ravenswood Asylum stood silhouetted against the night sky, and there in one of the upper windows I saw a figure watching me leave. Even from this distance I could see its eyes gleaming in the darkness. I didn't stop driving until I was back in the city, surrounded by the comforting sounds of traffic and normal living people. It wasn't until I got home that I remembered my camera. With trembling hands I downloaded the photos. Most were what I expected, creepy shots of abandoned rooms and corridors, but then I came to the one I'd taken of the ghost woman. My breath caught in my throat. There she was, as solid as you or me, but her eyes were completely black, just as I'd seen them, and behind her, reflected in a broken mirror, were faces, dozens of faces, all with the same black eyes and terrible smiles. I deleted the photos, all of them. Then I threw my camera away for good measure. My urban exploration days were over. I still have nightmares about Ravenswood, about black eyes and reaching hands, and the feeling of being trapped in endless decaying corridors. Sometimes when I'm alone at night I think I can hear whispers, can see shadows moving just at the edge of my vision. I never wrote about Ravenswood on my blog, never told anyone what really happened that night. Who would believe me? But I know the truth. I know that sometimes the dead don't rest easy, that there are places in this world where the veil between life and death is thin, where the insane and the tortured linger long after their bodies have turned to dust. And I know that Ravenswood is waiting for the next curious explorer, the next thrill seeker, looking for a good scare, waiting to welcome them home, just as it had welcomed me. So if you're ever driving down a lonely road and see a crumbling old building in the distance, think twice before exploring, because you never know what might be exploring you right back. And once you enter places like Ravenswood, you might find that you never truly leave.